All right, I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020, and the Portland Board of Public Education is meeting virtually through Zoom. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Atkinson.
Here.
Mr. Balfont, Ms. Bondo.
Présente.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Ms. Figdor.
Here.
Ms. Morioni.
Here.
Ms. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Trevorrow.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Mr. Casiel Reyes. Ms. Habib Saeed. Mr. Parrott. Ms. Yangala. And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. And we did know ahead of time that Ms. Brown will not be joining us, and Mr. Balfont is running late. So he not running late, but rather he had a work meeting that was not going to finish until after 6. So he should be joining us shortly. Would everyone please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance?
And I'm supposed to share my screen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Janet.
Yes, thank you, Janet. All right. For the report of the chair, I have a statement I want to read. I'm working to pull it up on my screen. Just give me a second. Obviously, there's been a lot going on over the last week, not just here in our city, but throughout our entire nation, and certainly over the entire world. People have been talking a lot about what's going on here in our country after the murder of George Floyd. So I have a short statement I want to share with the board and the community, and then I'll move us along the agenda. Society is riddled with injustices. We see them in our criminal justice system, our healthcare system, our economic system, and certainly in our public education system. These injustices that are often founded on racist ideals, institutionalized systems of winners and losers in society. Last Monday, May 25th, 2020, the world witnessed the murder of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man while in the custody of the Minneapolis Police Department. Over the last week, we've seen protests break out in cities all over the country, including right here in Portland, with citizens demanding justice. I understand that many of the people demonstrating in our streets are Portland Public Schools students, and I want to let them and the rest of our community that I stand in solidarity with them, demanding justice and equality for all. Watching the video of George Floyd's murder caused me physical pain. It triggered feelings of anger, frustration, fear, and hopelessness. I don't doubt that many of us have cried over the last week. Maybe you felt lost, exhausted, or sick. I just can't imagine that anyone watched that video and didn't feel the need to make things change for the better. Demonstrations, protests, public engagement are all necessary to dismantle systemic racism. Reacting to the video in these ways is pretty straightforward in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy. But the ongoing long-term work that must follow is where real change happens. Also necessary for real systemic change is a willingness from some of us to make real sacrifices, especially from those who stand to benefit from society's injustices, those who have privilege to spare. This school board has made a commitment to dismantling systemic and ongoing inequities as part of our Portland Promise equity goal. and I have to be honest, and I include myself in this statement, we've not been willing to make the type of sacrifices that real change requires. I want to be part of positive change, and I have made plenty of sacrifices to be in a position that facilitates change, but I cannot do it alone. Your action and commitment are critical in disrupting and transforming Portland Public Schools. We just finalized a budget process last week where we had several opportunities to stand firmly on our values, on the same values that we brag about when we mention the Portland Promise. And to be honest with you, we swung and missed. We swung and missed on several fronts. And I'm sharing my personal opinion, and I'm perfectly fine if you disagree with that. But I feel like we missed some opportunities to speak clearly to this community, not just the school community, but the greater community in Portland, of the type of sacrifices that we're asking people to make so that we can create systems that don't produce inequities. If we're committed to work that is based on anti-racism, then we need to acknowledge that what we're producing in our schools, the inequities that we're producing, make us a racist institution, because those inequities disproportionately affect primarily students of color. And if the organization that we're leading is creating inequitable results, then we're not doing our job, and we're certainly not standing by our Portland Promise. This is all very much tied to what we saw happen in Minneapolis. These small little daily nuances that we can just brush over and think that we can get to next year on a budget, or that we can postpone. Those are the things that just compound over and over again and create those gaps that we talk about, get deeper and further away from each other. I've said many times, particularly when we have new board members come in, that when we hear from people in our community, when we get emails, when we get phone calls, certainly when we have public hearings and people testify, that as much as we value that and we want to make space for that and we want to listen to those folks, that we really are not, and we really have not been able to listen to every voice in our community. And when we do listen to them, are we taking what they're saying into account? Are we really basing our decisions on what we're hearing people say? Or are we showing up already with our minds made up and decisions already made? Because if that's what we're doing, then we're not doing our job. And we're making things like what happened in Minneapolis, we're contributing to that. We really are, because an injustice anywhere, we all share the blame for those. Now, I don't doubt that everyone that's in this room, everyone that's in this meeting, means to do well. And no one here, I think, wants to be part of negativity. No one here wants to burn things down or just walk away and then give up. We're all here committed to do this work. But we have to be real with each other. We have to. We can't just say cool things and use the hashtags and talk about the Portland Promise and say the right things. But then when it's time to make decisions, we can't walk away from them just because some people leaned on us a little bit heavy. So now that we're in the heat of the aftermath of a horrible tragedy, we have this energy behind us. I think it's on us, leaders of this district, to use that energy to advance our work, the work that we committed to doing years ago when we adopted the Portland Promise. If you're having trouble connecting the dots between the Portland Promise and the murder of George Floyd, I'd love to sit down and talk with you, because it's not that difficult to make the connections between those injustices. And they're all, like I said, rooted on racist ideals. And we have a responsibility and an opportunity as the leaders of a Portland Public School District to create some change and improve those conditions for people. So moving forward, I certainly hope that in between tragedies, we remain active and we remain engaged, and not just in the immediate aftermath. I'll move us along then to the next item on our agenda. The report of the students. We were due for a Portland High School report from Stephanie Brown, and I don't think that we have it. She's not here with us today, and she was supposed to send it to the superintendent, and I don't think that we have it. So we'll move on then to the report of the superintendent. Superintendent, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin my comments today by recognizing the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland. We're honored to have their children among our students today. I would also like to join Chair Rodriguez in expressing my deepest sorrow for the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis last week. This is the most recent of a long list of deaths of Black Americans at the hand of the institution that is in place to serve and protect us. Our Portland Promise Equity goal commits us to rooting out ongoing and systemic inequities in the Portland schools. As an organization, when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we see the same bias and injustice that led to the killing of Mr. Floyd and gave rise to the anger that motivates the protesters in Portland and beyond. Whether by looking at the achievement gaps between white and non-white students or the disparate impact of discipline on the same groups, Portland Public Schools has a great deal of work to do to redress these injustices. Having been here for almost 4 years now, I'm ashamed of the slow progress we have made on these issues. Goals are great, but our students in our community should expect more. So I would like to reaffirm that commitment and call on every member of the Portland Public Schools staff to do the same, and for each of us to take the time to make it clear to our Black students and staff that their lives indeed matter to us. I also call on other institutions in the city, state, and country to that same examination of their practices in an effort to recognize unjust practices and proactively work to eliminate them. Next, I would like to extend my condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Elaine Nahimana, who passed away this weekend. Elaine was a strong advocate and leader in Portland's immigrant community. As founding executive director of the Greater Portland Immigrant Center, Elaine championed the needs and interests of Portland's immigrants. He recognized the strengths in our communities and was a strong believer in the power of education to transform and improve lives. I will miss his gentle demeanor and his amazing smile. Rest in peace, Elaine. Later tonight, during our board focus on educational issues, we will hear updates on how we're winding down this school year, preparing for summer school and food delivery, and thinking about the start of the next school year. One important milestone in the end of the school year is senior graduation, and we're happy to be able to announce that the 2020 graduation ceremonies are planned as drive-in events scheduled for August 5th and 6th at the Ocean Gateway parking lots as follows. Portland High School will be at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, August 5th. Deering High School seniors will graduate on Thursday, August 6th. Due to the size of that large class and limited capacity at Ocean Gateway, there will be 2 ceremonies for Deering, one at 10 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. And then to wrap it up, Casco Bay High School's seniors, their ceremony will be on Thursday, August 6th at 6 p.m. It is fitting that we will be sending off this amazing, resilient group of students in a place that sees the sun rise over Portland every morning. We know that this group will rise above the challenges that have been thrown their way and will make the difference that we need in this world. I look forward to celebrating them with their families and teachers in August. I would like to thank the City of Portland, especially City Manager John Jennings and Police Chief Frank Clark, for their assistance in making these events a possibility. Our next board meeting is scheduled for June 16th. That will be the last board meeting of the year before the board's summer recess. We will be honoring our 2020 Portland Public School retirees at that time, so I look forward to celebrating their accomplishments with you at that time. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, for the report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of May 26, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Bondo, second by Ms. Thompson. Are there any questions on the motion? Ms. Figdor?
There's one error that I noticed. It was, sorry, I now cannot find the document. It was under the votes on the budget, the second vote that we took. So this is, I'm sorry, let's see. This is Ms. Thompson's amendment.
What page are you in?
This is page 2 in Ms. Thompson's amendment. And the vote, it says it was voted 5-4 by roll call vote, and that is correct. But if you look at the votes, they don't add up to 5-4, and I voted no, not yes. So this is page 2, the second vote on the budget. It was Ms. Thompson's vote.
So is it your vote that needs to be changed?
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. Are there any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any other board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call, please indicate whether you're in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of May 26, 2020 with the amendment that Ms. Figdor brought up to change page 2. Superintendent will call the roll.
Mr. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Balfons?
Yes.
Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Figdor?
Yes.
Ms. Morioni?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Yes.
And Chair Rodriguez?
Yes. Yes, sorry. Next, consent items. Will the superintendent please read the list of donations made to the district?
We have no donations to report.
That's really, really unfortunate. All right, next we have, for the board focus on educational issues, we have an update on the continuity of instruction plan. Superintendent, you're gonna set us up for this?
Yes.
All right, you have the floor.
Today, we're updating you on the plans for wrapping up the school year, specifically our Sun School and supplemental instructional units. This will be led by Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally. We will next provide an overview about our transition to summer school food distribution with Food Service Director Jane McLucas. And finally, we will also provide an overview of the work to prepare for the opening of school next year, and Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend will lead that discussion. And I actually just realized that I prepared these notes before we had talked through the cadence, and we actually will have Mr. Townsend's presentation on the reopening plans ahead of the food service presentation. So Ms. McLucas will bring up the last section of the agenda. I would like to thank all three of them and their teams for their amazing work that they've done organizing our work in these areas and getting through these incredibly challenging 3 months of school and preparing us for the work ahead in the next 3 months. We're very fortunate to have these hardworking, dedicated, and committed leaders, and I know that they have numerous members of their teams that are here to help with the presentation, so I will allow them to do those introductions. So Malia, take it away.
Great. Can you hear me? Good. A thumbs up. Thank you, Marty. Good evening, everybody. So our aim this evening is to briefly update you on Sun School implementation and the emerging plans for the week of educator PD in collaboration that will be happening during the third week in June. But in light of the current context, I just want to take a moment to affirm my agreement with and support for the superintendent's message. I personally posted a black square on my social media accounts this morning in recognition of Blackout Tuesday. As I did that, I felt aware of how that demonstration of solidarity can ring hollow without actions to follow. In my morning reflection that I do, I reaffirmed my commitment to being comfortable with the uncomfortable and walking the walk with the words in our equity goal for the Portland Promise. So on the one hand, doing a usual update of the implementation of our work feels dissonant with my focus and my emotions and from what I'm hearing from students and educators. But then I think about how making systemic moves, like prioritizing the last 2 weeks of school to help the students who need and deserve more time, attention, and support, is taking action. And so I feel grateful to talk about that one small move we've made with you all this evening. Like the superintendent mentioned, there are a few folks here to help just shed light on what it's looking like. Jessie Robinson, who's our Director of Curriculums, Assessment, and Instruction, is here. And then two of our principals, Bev from Ocean Ave Elementary and Caitlin from King, will give just two little snapshots of what Sun School is looking like on the ground in their schools. So in terms of Sun School, as shared in the superintendent's letter to the community on April 14th, the intention behind Sun School is aligned with our equity goal and with our remote learning goal to mitigate learning gaps. And it's by providing this additional time and support to students who need that, either because they got behind during remote learning or because they were not already meeting grade level standards before we went into remote learning and the gap stayed the same or widened during the spring. The spirit of this move is aligned with our first two learning beliefs that, one, all learners can rise to high expectations, and two, that our students or our learners have different strengths, needs, and starting points based on who they are and what they've experienced, and that we acknowledge that some students need more time, support, and attention in order to reach the same high standards as their peers. So in terms of our approach, each school designed their own specific plans for the 2 weeks of targeted support based on a common set of design agreements that we built via a collaborative and iterative process with our schools. So you can see them here, and I'll just step you through these briefly. The first agreement was that we would be putting the lion's share of our time to the students who are furthest behind during these 2 weeks, which meant that we're also not introducing any new standards, that this is really time to revisit, revise, and remediate on information and standards that were already pushed out. We also talked about prioritizing standards most essential for students to be successful in the fall, and that the specials and related arts opportunities would be available for the purpose of engagement. So we had a conversation about whether or not, if a student wasn't meeting a standard in the related arts, if we would bring them back to Sun School to work on those standards. And in the end, agreed that we would really focus on the core content areas and at the elementary on math and English language arts, but that we still wanted to make those related arts and specials experiences accessible and available to students, both in the enrichment optional opportunities, which you'll hear about in a minute, but also for students that are in Sun School, because there's a recognition that for many students coming to school for music or the arts are motivating and help them be and feel more engaged. We named that connection is still central and a huge focus throughout remote Sun School. And we talked about May 29th marking a clear transition into this new kind of focus and structure for these last 2 weeks. End of year rituals are still happening, and schools are determining when and how they do that. And then finally, all students in the district will have the opportunity to access learning and engagement, if not in Sun School, through the optional enrichment activities. The specific plans in terms of targeted support for Sun School were built by teachers and teams at the schools. And then the optional lessons and activities were coordinated centrally by Jessie, who's here this evening, in collaboration with our literacy and math coaches, middle school strategists, specials and related arts teachers, as well as our Chapter 104 teachers. And so we have 2,719 students that were invited to participate in Sun School, so about 40% of our student body. And depending on the school, we saw invitation and participation rates range from 16% of the student body to 66% of the student body, though most of our schools averaged around 40% of the students in the school were invited and asked to attend Sun School. This range, is not super surprising because we do have different needs in our schools. But overall, when we reflect back on the fact that our latest summative assessment results have about 55% of our students proficient in ELA and 35% in math, when we see about 40% of students invited to get additional time and help on standards, it feels in the ballpark of what we'd expect. So we're going to hear, like I mentioned, from 2 schools about what this is looking like on the ground. So first, I'm going to invite Bev Corsi to talk about an elementary example from Ocean Ave Elementary.
Thanks, Malia.
Yeah.
So we're right in the ballpark. We had 41% of our kids were invited. The teachers worked together in teams to decide what standards they were going to be teaching this last trimester in math and ELA. And the students who didn't show evidence of getting close to those standards were invited to our Sun School experience. The teachers did invite the kids themselves. They either had an email or communication that went and said, yay, your kid completed, or yay, your kid gets to spend 2 more weeks with the teacher. And they're having a really good time just in these first couple of days that they've had it. Teachers have all created an individualized plan to help students meet the 1 or more standards. They have built plans that look at the whole child and with the teachers who work with that child. So if there's an English language teacher, then they were included in making that plan. They're doing some small groups by Zoom. They're doing book clubs. Books were mailed to homes over the last couple of weeks so that the books would be there and they could have those conversations and talk about main idea and key detail and how characters change over time. In our younger grades, mostly in kindergarten, we spent home workbooks, transition workbooks from K to 1 that were aligned with what we do at our school. And those were not only going to be able to work for over Sun School, but then for the rest of the summer, that kids can continue on with that. Teachers have said that kids are connecting. They're feeling really good about that. Kids are already saying, I realize I can do this, where they weren't able to before. So these smaller groups are helpful, and they're being really cognizant of the students' overall schedule for the day, so making sure that they have siblings are able to get to their small groups as needed. Today during a meeting, East End shared that we were reticent, and we too were reticent, like this is something new. Not all teachers understand how to do some summer school, but turning it in. And all the teachers are literally saying that they love it. So thank you for the leadership on this and bringing Sun School to our kids.
Thank you, Bev. And Caitlin LeClaire, our principal of King Middle School, I think you're here if you want to jump in and share an example of what this is looking like at the secondary level.
Yes, thank you, Malia. We had 256 students that were invited to be a part of our Sun School experience, similar to what Bev just described. Our grade level teams prioritized math and ELA standards from our 3rd trimester, and students that had not yet met the standards were invited to attend. There was communication to all families from our leadership team that went out last week, outlining what both of those experiences would look like. For our students that are participating in Sun School, they are participating in learning experiences that are designed to reinforce or reteach standards that were taught in this remote learning environment throughout the third trimester, providing students an opportunity to receive some reteaching and additional teacher support. And students also have the opportunity to attend office hours and other virtual academic support opportunities offered by their teachers, similar to what is happening at the elementary level. At the middle level, students check in with their crew or advisory teacher every day, and that's encouraged by students in Sun School and those accessing optional learning activities throughout this 2-week period, and to be a part of, as Malia said, end of the year rituals and celebrations, which we hold to be very important. Additionally, they have access to related arts classes. So there are enrichment opportunities that students are exposed to, including creating photo journals, working on art projects, creating music. So there are a lot of opportunities for students to be engaged. And in our first 2 days of Sun School, we are seeing that our attendance rates are good, and we have many students who are not attending Sun School but are still staying connected with King through Crew.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin, for sharing. And so next we're going to hear just briefly from Jessie about the optional enrichment lessons that are available for all students and for students not attending Sun School.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Malia. So we've also provided optional enrichment materials for students and families, and these are for students who have met standards, as Malia said. These materials are meant to help students apply and extend what they've learned this year in new contexts. So they were designed so that students can do them largely independently, so that classroom teachers can focus on the students that need extra support. And I'm just going to talk through a couple examples. One example from this week is a science activity for kindergarten through 2nd graders designed to get students outside doing science. This one is called a sound map. Students notice sounds that they hear, write down their questions about any sounds they don't recognize, and draw a map of their sounds, which builds on inquiry and observation skills that they learned in their classes and gets them going outside and off the screen. For middle school, one math activity asks students to design a restaurant and a signature dish. Students are using ratios and percentages to find out how much to buy and how many calories will be in their delicious recipes. So these optional enrichment materials are available for elementary through high school students, and they can be found on the district website as well as individual school sites.
Great. Thank you, Jessie. So in closing, I mean, I think we would, be open to any questions you all have. At the end of our administrator meeting this morning, I pulled a quote from what one of the assistant principals shared, which was just also, I want to give a shout out about Sun School. There was some nervousness before we started, but every teacher I've talked to has said how much they love Sun School, how they feel like they're able to reach students and teach students on a deeper level, literally saying they love it. So like with anything, I know that it's not perfect, and I know that there's challenges and there's a lot of learning and growth, but I think in general, our intention here is to provide that really targeted, focused support for students who could benefit. And as you heard from the principals, I think there's just awesome examples of teachers figuring that out in this new context. So with that being said, we're open to some questions. Chair Rodriguez, I don't know if you think that would be appropriate right now.
Yeah, I think it seems like a right place to pause and have questions. I don't see anyone with their hand raised. Oh, here we go. Ms. Bondo?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, the team. This is Thank you for doing it. This is amazing. I have a few questions on the, when I look at the invited, the number invited, 2719, can we just maybe later on to try to break down on the grade and by race, how many we have on each categories, if we can do that, and also why we choose math and English language. I try to understand it's because we didn't have the ratio of our student who didn't meet the standard. This is the reason teacher or the team choose to have only math or an English language. This is the second one. And the third one is that I see those illustrative example by school, like Ocean Avenue and King Middle School. Do schools have to share those illustrative example to see which one can fit the best, or each school, like I saw on the presentation, has to build on its own? Because like I can see, some illustrative is better fit, because I see like King Middle School has a 101, then the student has to check with the teacher. And then the last one is that how those some class will work with the English learners. I try to see, because those students really need English supplement on the language. So are we going to work with the multilingual on those Sun School as well? Yes.
Okay. I'll do my best, Ms. Bondo, to answer, but you can remind me if I forgot any of your questions. So the first question is around breaking the data down by grade level and demographics.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and we have that by grade. This was new, so we don't have this centrally in our IC system. So that would be a very manual process. That's always the question we're interested in. So I think I want to take that offline and look at what's feasible, given the fact that this was very much a organic process this time that we hope to institutionalize, if there's similar situations like this in the future.
Okay.
In terms of your question about math and ELA, so that's the focus only at elementary. For the secondary levels, they're looking across content areas. So
okay.
Middle schools are focused on the 4 core content areas of math, English language, arts, social studies, and science. And then high school, they're looking at all their courses and determining if there are any grad standard students needed some more time and support on a revision time. But at the elementary level, I'll say that, and this is true actually across all levels, this doesn't mean that there aren't, cross-disciplinary type lessons and units being taught. So sometimes the English language arts, for instance, is taught through a science topic, but we were trying to prioritize, given the fact that it's only 2 weeks, some of these foundational standards that build and get used in other subject areas. As far as sharing across schools, this is work. We meet weekly with our administrative team as a group holistically, and then we meet in elementary and secondary admin teams, as well as with our coach teams. So there's quite a bit of structures in place for sharing and collaborating, in addition to then what happens outside of those meeting structures. So we try to prompt conversation and opportunity for people to get a sort of common agreement, like the agreements I shared, to start to share some of their thinking. And then we know that a lot of our schools then take that collaboration offline with each other to learn from each other. And then finally, in terms of ELL support, so our ELL teachers are very actively involved in supporting students through Sun School. One of the examples today from the person who shared that quote that I read, she was talking about how she had just popped in on someone's Zoom that they had going, and they were an English language arts teacher working with students on language acquisition. So that's a huge focus for our ELL educators. And they're very involved and engaged throughout this period.
Okay. Can I ask just a sub-question, Chair? Hello?
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I just want to make sure that you just mentioned about the Zoom, and I know then we collecting some device from some of our grade, like the 6th grade. So I try to understand. So it's gonna be after the sun class, or we going to leave those devices to those invited students? And that's the one. And because we didn't have the breakdown on the engagement and participation to all the grades after the 29, can we have that one later on to make sure how was the engagement and participation of most of students through the remotely learning? So we may have a better options to see those invited students, how they can be better engaged during the sun school. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go.
Let me just real quickly answer the question about the 6th grade. My understanding is that middle school students are not being expected to return their devices until after the week of the 15th. So middle school kids will have those devices through that,
Okay.
through all of Sun School.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent.
We'll go to Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just want to say thank you very much to our staff and Ms. Nally, central office staff, but in particular our teachers that have really been asked to constantly be innovative and come up with lesson plans from home. I mean, not come up with them, but just, I mean, they're just continually asked to do even more. So just want to make sure that the thanks is given there, because this is a really important 2 weeks for many, and for others. To be perfectly honest, I wanted to hear a little bit more about high schools, because I was thinking about, I don't often want to use my own son as an example, but you know, when the time was getting close, there was this feeling like, well, I'm a senior. I don't need the credit. I have enough to graduate. Why bother? And it's not even just seniors that are saying that. It's all through high school that he's hearing it. And I'm curious to know, have we even considered the high school? I'm using Deering as an example with the 4 classes, or even Portland with the 8. Has it ever been considered to say, you know what, if you really don't need the credit, or actually you can add more credits later in your high school years, could you just get maybe a W for I've withdrawn from that class or those classes, whatever you haven't completed, so that you take a little bit of this pressure off that now we have to do 2 more weeks of something we didn't even really want to keep doing. Again, I'm just basing this on what I've been hearing, and just curious as to how are we the last 2 weeks getting those that maybe weren't fully engaged before now, you know, more engaged. Just curious. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. I just want to be realistic about these 2 weeks and the hard work that our staff has been asked to do to get these 2 weeks done, and just don't want to check a box. I want to make sure we're giving good options to our students as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm partly hearing a question, partly hearing feedback in your comment, Marnie. So I think
I'll make it more of a question, Malia. Sorry. Have we considered those, for those classes that a student doesn't need that credit, to not make it a pass or an IP, but a withdraw from that class and not have that credit?
Erin, you can jump in on this piece as well, but I mean, I think we've been focused on, well, one, I just want to affirm your affirmation of the amount of work, effort, and creativity everybody's been putting into this across the system, and teachers in particular. Also, I think in terms of students, you know, being disengaged and how are we getting them more engaged, I mean, that's one of the central challenges of this, is acknowledging that we want to work with the students who've been least engaged in remote learning, but to try to do that successfully in remote learning is really hard. And so that's real. That's, there's no way to get around that. That's a real challenge. The theory behind this is that, our educators have fewer students to focus on, so that there's more of the capacity being directed toward fewer kids. But that's not to say that alone solves the issue at all. So I just want to be transparent about that. In terms of having students withdraw rather than to take these last couple of weeks to try to keep working on the standards, I don't think that's been a huge focus in the conversations. And again, Aaron, I know you did some of the deeper work with some of the high schools on the grading, if you want to elaborate on that piece. But yeah.
And actually, we have Portland High Principal Sheila Jepson here can speak.
Oh, great. I'm here.
Sheila.
Great.
Nope.
Hi. This is Sheila. Thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So we have had various iterations of what you're talking about, Mrs. Morioni, and we have allowed students to withdraw with no penalty for withdrawal from a course. I would say that our teachers did a great job at going through lists of students who needed the extra time to meet a standard, and our focus was really on doing that. I heard from teachers today that after spending one day in Sun School, students made it. I heard last week that the students who said, you just need to get this far, you can do it, did a lot of work last week to get to the finish line. I think the number that we gave from Portland High, we had 141 students that are in Sun School, and our staff and support folks and counselors and social workers are really working diligently to keep students engaged and get their work done in the remaining weeks through June 12th.
Thank you, Ms. Jepson. Can I ask
welcome.
a quick follow-up, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Our students, if they're in Sun School, they need to complete the 2 weeks. It's not like they can catch up, like you were saying that they were able to really work super hard in the week, pulled it up to a pass. Could they have just this 1 week and finish up, or they have to complete the 2 weeks in high school? I mean, I don't want to keep them there if they were able to get to the passing grade. I don't know.
I mean, if you're, once students get there, they're done. If it takes them 2 days or 4 days or 10 days, it's however long it takes them. They do not have to stay the whole 2 weeks. They stay until they get things done.
Yeah, and that's consistent across the high schools. Kind of aligned with our beliefs around proficiency work. The goal is mastery of the standards. Excuse me, not just certain time, and that's an important distinction, right? In this context, where one of the kind of cultural things about school that some schools worked against is like it feeling like a punishment to have to do more school, and trying to be working to reframe that as an opportunity, right, to be able to master standards. And so if we're just going to hang on to kids for a period of 2 weeks, even though they've already demonstrated mastery, that would counter that.
Thank you again very much for all the hard work. Thanks to the teachers for sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised. So maybe we move on to the next section.
Great. And this is pretty brief, but just a quick update on the way we're going to be spending the week of June 15th, which is really focused on educator collaboration and professional development. So we'll have 4 days of coordinated work at the either school or district level, Monday through Thursday, and then on the 5th day, Friday, that's reserved for teacher prep and closeout for the year. And in terms of what folks are focused on during this week, schools are developing individual plans, but we've had some collaboration across schools around some common objectives. So I'm highlighting some of those here. These are not necessarily the full set of objectives for each school, but I think they speak to some of the central and common and consistent work across many of our schools, which are to really use this time to celebrate successes and to sort of honor everything that people accomplished this year and with their students, to provide space for reflection on the year so that we're really capturing our lessons learned while they're fresh, to begin to tee up the fall planning given the potential scenarios that you're going to hear about momentarily. All schools will be reflecting on their TNTP survey results, which is a survey around staff climate and culture. And so there'll be transparency into that data and conversations to identify strengths and to figure out where schools want to prioritize their areas for growth and focus in their culture. There's going to be time for teachers to complete report cards and student feedback, as well as to do kindergarten screening, parent questionnaires. And then there's some supported collaboration for what we call like role groups across the district. So bring ELL teachers together, special education, pre-K social workers, etc. And then finally, in some cases, schools will be doing some professional development that tees folks up for the fall. There's a recognition of the fact that our teams and our teachers and all of our educators are pretty burnt out right now. And so we are not trying to sort of overload or expect that people are in the mindset and space to do a lot of new learning. But we're also trying to think about if there are things that would be helpful for teachers to be learning about and aware of before they go into the summer, so that that's not all new, and there's not all new information when they come back right before students come back. So that balance is something people are thinking a lot about. And as far as the cross-school learning and collaboration, that will happen largely on Tuesday, with some work with elementary schools on Wednesday morning. And all of this collaboration and professional learning will be done largely remotely. I'm sharing a couple of examples here of some of that cross-school district-wide work that will be happening. So one is around the K-8 illustrative math pedagogy and program. So we'll be pulling teachers together across the elementary schools for the launch work. So this is, as you can see, a more brief session. So there's a longer, deeper dive. But again, in honoring the fact that people just are not probably in the mindset to absorb that information, this is just focused on grounding folks who are planning to participate in implementing the curriculum and the philosophy around problem-based pedagogy, and helping connect that to the past few years of professional development teachers have been engaged in. There'll be some explicit conversation about some of the deep work illustrative math has done to integrate into the curriculum their approach to what they call unfinished learning from this period of time during the pandemic, and some exposure to the platform that will be used with the curriculum. And then middle school teachers who've been implementing the curriculum for a couple of years will also come together for a brief session to talk about some of these new pieces that are relevant to the context we're in, such as the unfinished learning, how to adapt math routines like student discourse into a remote context, and to get acclimated to the new platform. And then the other example I have here is around our ELL teachers across the district coming together. They'll be focused on the 2020 access data. We always have an access data retreat, which we didn't have this year because of the situation. So they'll take some time to really unpack that data and think about the implications for planning, do some reflections on remote learning so that they are starting to build in more detail around the scenarios for the fall. They have some work around the Loud Plan Handbook with some deeper focused work on students who are duly identified. And then there's plans to just really carve out time for recognition and praise and attending to the adult social emotional needs that we all see and experience and have right now. So those are just two of the examples of some of that cross-district coordinated work that will be happening that week. So, this is just a brief update to give you kind of a little bit of a preview and window into how we'll be spending that time. I think giving our educators a good amount of time to complete the work, reflect, begin to plan forward is hugely, hugely valuable. And so we're grateful for that opportunity. So open to some questions here if anybody has them.
Yep. I see Ms. Thompson has her hand raised.
Thank you, Malia and staff. I just had a quick question. General consensus, I'm hearing mixed messages about the thoughts of coming back for the fall from teachers and some fear and some anxiety. And I didn't know, I know you talked a little bit about social emotional, but what is there a general consensus or the feelings of coming back in the fall, and how are we, working through that, and what steps are we going to take if some don't feel comfortable or they're immune compromised, et cetera, and all of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Ms. Thompson, and it's actually something we're going to talk about in just a minute. So I wanted to move through this briefly because really the bigger discussion we want to have with you all is about where we're at with our fall planning. And we'll talk in that conversation about how we've been getting input, including a survey that's about to go out to all educators that literally asks those types of questions. So we have some more comprehensive data around where people are at with their comfort and or ability to come back. So yeah, we'll get to that in more depth in a minute.
Are you also going to cover discussions with the city of Portland for summertime and how rec is going to work at the schools and what schools and how that is all going to come about? Is that covered as well? Slides?
Yeah, that's part of the fall plan.
All right, I'll be quiet for now.
That's good. You have us teed up, so you're excited for that.
All right, thank you.
So, so if we have any other questions about the section we just reviewed on the professional development for the teachers, if we don't have any hands raised, I think we can probably move on to our reopening.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody.
Actually, I'm sorry. I see Ms. Morioni raised her hand. Let me just give her a chance before we move on. Sorry, Ms. Morioni.
Sorry, everybody. I wanted to do one more follow-up about that discussion I had about withdrawing from a class. And my only thought was that I'm not sure students and or families know about that option. So if that is indeed something that can happen when a student decides doesn't need the course, I think I'm just trying to think of ways to take the pressure off the students when they are already feeling like they potentially could be failing, or it could be something they can't. I don't know, just an idea that maybe some type of messaging out so that students and parents would understand, or families might understand that better. Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback.
So I think we can move on now to the reopening section.
Great. And thank you, Ms. Thompson, for the wonderful segue into this presentation. That was perfect. And I'm happy to be joined this evening by Fiona Hopper, who is one of our teacher leaders on the academic team and a longtime teacher in the district. Spent a lot of years at Reiki with a variety of populations, as well as Sue Ellen Santiago, our wonderful principal from Lincoln Middle School. They're both members of the design team that we'll talk about in a minute. That's been a kind of core part of our process as we've considered the reopening. And as well, wanted to acknowledge and appreciate being part of the leadership team here. As you heard Javier's statement, Malia's reflections, it's something we have been connecting about over the past few days, but I would say, has drawn us together in this work and why we're here and a team to be doing this work together. And so appreciation as well for the board, and Roberta, your comments and the board's leadership with an equity direction. And I too, like Malia, turn towards schools and how we do schools differently in service of our students furthest from opportunity as the way for me to represent the action I want to take. And so this whole process of considering what we're going to do in the fall has created a tremendous opportunity for us to engage in some of those questions. So our team, the design team, as we'll speak about, has adopted a bit of a mantra around not adapting school, but reimagining school and what that might mean for us and might mean to advance the goals of the Portland Promise. So tonight, what we want to do for just a little bit is provide an overview of how we've been going about this work in the planning process and kind of what our next steps are and continued engagement in terms of fleshing out the different scenario, our strategies around the different scenarios we might face this fall. And then we'll touch on just some of what our current thinking is about the recommendations for the different reopening scenarios briefly, and just recognize there's a lot of work to go before any of that decision making is final, both in terms of our planning process, but obviously in terms of, we're almost 2.5 to 3 months out. And so knowing exactly what the world will look like at that point, we're a long ways away. So, to begin, sorry. Okay. What I'll say, if this loads, we'll see, but is kind of the planning team. We brought together a small team, design team that's made up of a diverse set of perspectives from across the district to focus on what we named as our initial challenge, was developing recommendations for the potential scenarios we might face in the fall that would be in service of students most furthest from the opportunity right now. So the students we want to make sure that we're able to serve. We feel like if we can serve them well, then we'll be in a position to serve all students well. And so we identified 4 key goals that we are working towards. And these, will feel similar, but we're locating it in this context of having to come back to school. So the first was in the mitigating engagement and learning gaps, promoting wellness and safety. So thinking about the physical and mental health of our students. Being able to advance essential standards in the work as we come back next year, and supporting the culture of our community and building a strong, strong community through this work and challenge together. So the design team, and want to recognize a number of individuals. So we have been had the opportunity to work and devoted a bunch of time together on this. So Blanca Santiago, who is the social worker with our multilingual team, Sue Ellen, as I've mentioned, Carrie Foster, the president of the PEA, has been a part of the team, Beverly Stevens, elementary leader, Sheila Jepson, so some folks who've been here this evening as the high school perspective, Eric Wood, our transportation director, has held kind of the operations perspective as part of the team, Tina Vayu, of course, our nursing coordinator, to really hold the health and wellness perspectives and maintain that connection to the CDC guidance. Fiona Hopper, who you'll hear from in a moment, and Brooke Teller, as well as a teacher leader. And over the course of our meetings, we've been meeting since early May, we've been able to be graced by some additional perspective to be able to move the work forward. So we appreciate that board member Adam Burke has been able to join us for a number of meetings and bring his experience around design thinking processes, and obviously his experience as a parent to the work. We've had 2 wonderful parent community specialists that have joined us, and then a range of teachers from grade levels and schools across the city, including Sarah Swenson as a pre-K teacher, Amy Wu as a kindergarten teacher, Karen Southard, who is a 2nd grade teacher at Riverton, Kristen Tedesco, also a 2nd grade teacher at Lyseth, Dan Nogar, who coordinates Rise and Shine at East End, Kathleen Costa, who's an English teacher at Deering, Priya Nadaran, Priya, who is a math teacher at Casco Bay, and lastly, Megan McDevitt, who's a middle school teacher at Lincoln. So it's been awesome to have that group that's really helped to push our thinking and work forward. We've approached this work using what we refer to kind of as a design thinking methodology. So where we are at in that process is having developed kind of our version 1.0 of our thinking for these recommendations of where how we might approach the three different scenarios we might face in the fall. You know, the opportunity to be operating at full capacity, needing to have some type of social distancing, school arrangement, or maintaining remote learning. So to get us to that place of that, well, before I jump there, there are a few things, the design kind of criteria for our design that we've been holding that we want to make sure. So this is similar to our goals, keeping equity at the center, thinking a lot about safety, wellness, agility, recognizing that next year may require us to shift and transition from one mode of schooling to another, be it for short periods of time or potentially longer periods of time like we experienced this year. So we want to be prepared to be able to make those transitions. Coherence has been another one, and certainly has been driven by a lot of the feedback we've gotten from students and families and teachers in terms of what they're experiencing, certainly through remote learning and historically. So we want to have increased coherence in the implementation of our strategies across the system. And lastly, the culture goal that I said, that this is an opportunity for us to continue to grow our school and district culture. So a number of things that we did to kind of enter into this process and referred to in the design thinking work as like empathizing. So we gathered a bunch of initial evidence where schools and a number of schools had been doing surveys of their staff or parent community about their experiences with remote learning. So we gathered that. PEA had data that they had shared with us. As well, there was PTO feedback that had been shared with us that was something that the design team reviewed and considered, additional input from the parent community specialists. We identified a few different kind of profiles of students and staff across the district and did empathy interviews with them to kind of go real deep on what those experiences are. And that was a data source that we looked at to help inform our recommendations. And then as well, certainly utilized a lot of the examples from locally, being in connection with the planning work that's happening in other local districts, as well as national and international work that's happening where reopening is maybe happening a little bit ahead of us, and all the while being mindful of the current state of the CDC guidance in terms of health and safety, and the Department of Ed guidance as it stands right now. As we've gotten going, we have really ramped up our community engagement efforts. So in addition to what I was just naming, over the past few weeks, we've had the opportunity to meet, in some cases regularly, with these different groups to get there, to hear and listen and really focus on listening about what their experiences have been during remote learning and what some of their questions and wonderings and concerns and ideas are about coming back in the fall. So this is a range of groups, and we've been able to sustain our teacher focus groups. This week will be our third week in a row where we've been able to continue to have one afternoon a week for elementary and another for secondary, where we're continuing a dialogue with them. So in addition to the folks on the team, we've really appreciated the opportunity to stay connected to these groups to help inform this work so that the recommendations and the work that we ultimately do in next year is really grounded in those experiences that we've had over the past couple months. So where we are again in the process is, and in a minute I'll invite Fiona and then Sue Ellen to talk a little bit about the content, but we have more engagement plans. So, this is not done. We're at that initial version 1.0 and moving into what we would kind of refer to as the testing process. So we have additional focus groups scheduled where we'll be engaging with people around some of the specific ideas, in our draft plan. As Malia mentioned a moment ago, we are preparing to roll out surveys to both staff and families about, again, both retrospectively gathering a broader set of data about their experiences with remote learning, but with a number of questions specifically to inform our planning for the fall. So questions that may, as Board Member Thompson referenced, their comfort level of returning, things around potential choices and scheduling issues that might influence what we end up doing with, with our plans for the fall. So our goal is to kind of finalize recommendations, and again, want to highlight kind of recommendations by June 12th, so that, as it flows into what Malia was describing in terms of the week of PD, people have some understanding of where we may be when we get to the return to school in August. So we anticipate, tonight's just an update on where we're at in our planning process. Our best estimate and kind of aspiration at this point is that we'll be in a conversation with you all in early August when we return, when the board calendar resumes, and we have a much clearer sense of what it is we actually will be facing, but based on the experiences of the summer, how the virus continues to evolve, and what the final guidance is from the state or from the CDC. A lot of that guidance right now is still very tentative in terms of recommendations about what we may do in the fall. So we expect to bring and engage with you more concretely at that point to make decisions about which scenario we would enact to start the year. That being said, we're still ramping up a lot of our implementation prep and kind of communications, so that work, regardless of that we're prepared, and that notion of agility, will be ongoing. So a number of pieces have begun already as it relates to facilities, doing facility analysis, as we are considering, the capacity based on current social distancing requirements for our schools, examining ventilation concerns, and thinking about office reconfiguration, so we can move towards reopening our schools to some degree to both staff and students. We're not at that place yet, but the facilities team has begun some of that work, certainly beginning developing plans and proposals of how we can expand technology access. Things like that is work that's already underway to be able to support whatever we're going to encounter this fall. So, and then highlighting these, couple of weeks of staff PD to help us bring everybody along. So, as Malia talked about, closing out the year, and then knowing we'll have our traditional August Institute, in which will be, especially essential this year to be able to finalize plans. One of the, greatest challenges I think we've all experienced was the sudden transition, and we appreciate having had the couple of days to be able to launch into remote learning. But, we're trying to be mindful and take advantage of doing some advanced thinking and planning to be able to improve the experience, the learning experience for students and families, and to be able to ensure we have strong health and safety protocols in place so that whatever we do, we are promoting the wellness, health, and safety of all of our staff and students in whatever scenario we enact, and that we can maximize that and don't at any point put anybody at further risk of suffering from the virus. So with that overview around our process, I'd like to turn it over to Fiona Hopper to speak for a minute, a little bit of first what we've heard and some of the, based on some of this feedback, and what are some of the kind of broad recommendations that we think are going to be relevant across any scenario we face. Fiona?
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks everyone. Nice to see all of you. I'm not going to read through all of these on this slide. I thought I would just pull out a few to sort of add a little more depth to. So these are the needs that have surfaced from all of the different stakeholder groups that Aaron discussed. And I think a couple are just super critical going forward. They're all critical, but a few deserve a little extra special attention. And the first one is interpersonal connection. We have seen that students, and I'm sure we're all feeling it in our own ways personally, but that students and our community really depends on school for connection and for relationship building and for social emotional health and wellness. So that piece of interpersonal connection needs to be really fostered and designed with intention, no matter whether we're doing a socially distanced school, remote learning, or some combination thereof next year. So we've spent a lot of time as a team discussing how do we foster really quality relationship building between students and teachers and students and other students in a variety of settings that might befall us next year. We also have been talking a lot about learning support and learning experience. this idea of consistency. Everyone obviously was just thrown into this situation without any kind of preparation. So going forward, it's become really clear that there needs to be some more evenness in how the educational experience is unrolling for students and for families. And I would add at the end about the technology component. Technology, it's its own literacy, and there are varying degrees of it among students, among parents, and among the educators in the Portland Public Schools. So we have really seen students, kids, families, teachers rise to the occasion to try to figure out a kind of technology literacy that is very unfamiliar to most people. And it's become abundantly clear to all of us that we need to support the growth of technology literacy among our community and ourselves going forward. I did just want to point out, everyone knows I love to go off script when given the opportunity. So I did want to just assert that in order to really fulfill these needs that have been outlined here, we can center them, and we can say that we're centering them, but to really live up to those obligations that we'll need to do exactly what Roberto was describing in his remarks at the opening of this meeting. We will have to make decisions about reallocating resources, about asking for sacrifices, and really about truly letting equity lead, not just in theory, but in practice. So that is the tough work that this team is against right now, and that all of us are going to be making decisions about in the very near future. Erin, thank you. So there are several planning assumptions that we have been taking into account, obviously health and safety being most critical among them. And I would just like to highlight that I think all of us on the team have really been struggling with the gravity of the realization that asking students to come back into school is asking them to risk their health or potentially the risk of their family's health as well. And that really puts a different kind of pressure on school. Like, we all here in this meeting know that school is important. We could all say that we believe it's important. You wouldn't be on the school board, or I wouldn't be an educator. But we as a team have really had to sort of get deep into what is it that happens in person in a classroom between teachers and students that is so critical that we would want to invite students and families into a situation where they could potentially be at risk. That is heavy stuff to be carrying, and but on the positive side really means that we've got to get clear about our purpose, and I think there are many opportunities buried in this situation. So Erin talks about the new territory to be explored, and it really has asked us to think about how we can use school to align with the goals of the Portland Promise. This is potentially a once in a generation, maybe even once in a century opportunity to think about what it looks like, and sort of let go of the idea that we need to get everybody back in the same way as where we left. I think that we can get really clear, or what our team has talked about is getting really clear about what is the learning, why are we teaching that, why is it so important, and how are we doing it? So that kind of clarity is clarity we've been working towards in standards work for many, many years, but now the ante is just upped even further to get crystal clear on what we're teaching and why. This situation has also been asking this team to grapple with what kinds of relationship building practices we implement across our system to ensure that students and families feel connected. Obviously, the ante is upped on that if we're continuing in remote learning as well. And to really center the needs of families the furthest from opportunity means looking at all of our resources, human, material, educational, and otherwise, with fresh eyes. I think this team has been sort of trying to live in the spirit of the following quote from Navajo scholar Mark Charles. He's a scholar on the doctrine of discovery. And he writes that the human imagination serves as a powerful tool in the construction of social systems. So we as a team are trying to use our imagination as best we can to really think about constructing a social system within our school that better meets the needs of our students. No easy task when all of us are stressed out and have our children screaming in the background, etc. I think I'm ready for the next one, Erin. Thank you. Some of the health and safety protocols that we have been talking about are kind of outlined here. I think they're not ones that would be shocking to anybody here. However, it does really involve this sort of big picture revisioning of school, and then also looking at so many different angles: transportation, facility use, ventilation. How do we use outdoor space differently than we maybe ever have considered or ever prepared for? There's huge opportunities in that outdoor space, but that has been an area that we haven't put a ton of infrastructure into in the past. And then obviously some of the points that were already brought up about how many staff, students, families are going to be able to come back in a socially distant school environment if they are immunocompromised or otherwise need to stay home. And then, thank you. And then the learning experience, which is where we've spent a lot of time in many different small groups discussing what do we need to support students in sort of the social emotional learning, connection, relationship building area, also to support learning. We know that the opportunity gap has widened between students who have access to more resources and opportunities than those who don't. And how do we make next year, or how do we set up structures next year to try to close that gap as much as possible? So I'll just highlight a couple of these that we've been discussing. One is the role of a student advisor. There are structures for this at all 3 high schools currently, varying degrees of intensity and models in each of those, but there is existing structures. And there is some structure as well in the middle school for assigning a student an advisor. We've been discussing what that might look like at the upper elementary grades as well. And that is a real strategy to ensure not only that students have a tight connection and relationship with one teacher going forward, but also as connects to the following bullet about personalized learning plans. So we've been discussing how, what the likelihood and the reality is of developing individualized learning plans for all students as a way to sort of help figure out who needs what after we know this long extended period of remote learning has widened the gaps I mentioned earlier. I think that I would just like to end by saying to all of you on the board, whether I don't know that you'll get to hear it from anybody else, but I've taught in Portland for 15 years. I have seen management by crisis so many times, and I am so deeply impressed by the leaders of the reopening team. This is not management by crisis. This is managing a crisis with intention. I honestly have never witnessed anything like it in my school career. So my hat is off to Erin and Kippy and Malia, who are leading the team. They really are staying calm and clear and trying to find the opportunity within the biggest crisis that probably any of us will see in education in our lifetime, hopefully. So thank you to all of them. I hope that it's a shout out that others will echo as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. And just to kind of center like these last 2 slides of this health, safety and health protocols and these learning experience strategies, we think these are things, that are just going to become part of how we do school moving forward, right? Or we want to deepen in our practice, certainly in how Fiona framed in terms of the health and safety stuff. We know we'll have to grapple with that until, we get to the other side of this pandemic, and who knows when that will be and what that will really look like. So those are strategies to carry us through. And many of these learning experience strategies, specifically the first 2 that Fiona referenced, the advisor and the learning plans, these were strategies that were part of the Portland Promise from the adoption, right? And so, and there's been work towards, and this really feels like an opportunity to advance that work as part of our overall goals. So again, these are things that we feel like are part of this opportunity to, come back to school with a different intention and advancing some work that we think has been important to realize our equity and achievement and whole student goals, since the inception of our Portland Promise. But to then frame up a little bit of how these may play out and some of the additional considerations depending on the different scenario we might face. So Ellen's going to give some, share a few highlights of what our current thinking is about some of the different scenarios, whether we're at full capacity, the socially distanced school, or at maintaining remote learning. So Sue Ellen.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you for having us here tonight to share the work of our team. I would echo what Fiona shared, that while this is a huge task and one that at many times feels incredibly overwhelming, we're very fortunate to have the leadership of Malia, Aaron, and Kippy to support us in this work. And I feel really confident that in the end, we are going to have a really solid plan that will feel like we've done our due diligence in looking at feedback and examining our options that are in the best interest of students and staff in Portland. So as we continue to look at what these variety of options might look like, we've explored as a team and started to brainstorm about a few. And one is if we are able to return to school in a full capacity. And obviously for many of us, this would be our dream, right? We can all be back in school, a full school of students and a full school of staff. I think an important thing to note about this is that we've talked as a team that if we are able to go back in full capacity, that this would not just simply be a return to normal as we left it in March, that we would really take the things that we've learned and all of the goals in the Portland Promise, as both Fiona and Aaron spoke about just previously, some of which we've started to realize and some of which we haven't, and take this opportunity to kind of reimagine school. And it's a special moment for us to stop and do that. What is working and what we've already been doing, and what are opportunities that we've learned through remote learning actually are better for our students and our community. So I think our goal here is to look at combinations of remote and synchronous and asynchronous learning options for students, and that we would look across those cross-scenario strategies that Fiona just talked about and really think about how we can better understand what we know about our students in our community and how we can serve them to meet those equity goals for equitable outcomes for all. This also is a great opportunity for us to rethink snow days. As an example, hard to talk about right now, but maybe we can execute some of the things we've learned in remote learning for those. Sorry, Aaron.
No, that's
a second option that we've been talking a lot about, and certainly I think our most complex option, is this idea of socially distanced school. And in this option, this is really complex because it would require us to bring students back in smaller learning groups. And so here you can see we've talked about starting small, launching small, prioritizing students at each of our grade spans, and within our grade spans, who would be the students that we would want to say, focus here first. And that's a difficult conversation because all of our students are important and we want all students to be able to access in-person learning. We're also exploring what alternate scheduling options might look like. As we look at students and staff that might opt out of returning to remote learning, we know our numbers might be smaller anyway with those smaller learning groups. So what would it look like to have different rotations? So you see here, we've talked about student rotations, having a couple of days on, a couple of days off, rotating the who is physically in person in the building. Also looking at partial day programming rather than full day, which also leads us to how would we feed our students? How would we transport our students? So thinking about being able to provide meals to our students that they can take home rather than eating at school, reducing who we're transporting to school if families are able to get students to school versus using our school transportation, and also thinking about how we use our facilities and how we move throughout the building. We've talked about having the smaller groups and having there be less traffic throughout the school. I'm in a middle school, and our typical day would consist of a ton of movement, class to class, 7, 8, 9 times a day, students at lockers and things like that. So in this case, when we talk about socially distanced scenario, we're really talking about using our facilities really differently with fewer people at a time. In the third option, this is continued, sorry, socially distanced school. Thank you, Erin. In this option, actually, I would say in all of our options, but particularly in this one, we've talked about prioritizing the SEL, social emotional learning programming. So Fiona mentioned this, and I think our team has unanimously decided and agree with the fact that the priority of school for our students is about that interpersonal connection and the social emotional wellness. And so as we look at these different structures and the different groupings and the alternative schedules that we're exploring, we're keeping that at the core of everything that we do. And the third scenario that we are talking about is a continuation of remote learning. And while a continuation and maintaining remote learning like we're in now, I think we're really looking at how can we learn from the experience that we've been in this spring and learn about what has worked and what could we do better with our most vulnerable students in mind. So we're thinking about how we can improve instruction and what effective instruction looks like in a remote environment. And that might look different at the elementary, the middle school, and the high school levels. We're looking at different opportunities for collaboration. How do we help students stay connected with each other and collaborate? We know that students learn best when they're able to talk and hear and engage in dialogue with their peers. So figuring out how we can use the technology that we have available to us to help continue to grow and improve on our ability to let students engage with learning in that way. We're also we've learned a lot about the importance of consistent and predictable schedules, both for students, for our families, and for staff. So the importance of thinking about how we coordinate schedules for families, how we make it very clear what you can plan for, what learning looks like on a given day, and things like the 4-day weekly schedule that we implemented post-April vacation district-wide, that's something that we as a team felt like there's been some traction and some positive energy around how that's worked for us. So that's an example of something that we're continuing to look at.
Great, thank you, Sue Ellen. So again, these are some of the tentative ideas. There's a much deeper, detailed document that still doesn't represent the level of detail we'll need to actually enact this, but that's attached to the board docs. So I spoke to this a little bit around implementation planning, but we've identified these as some of the kind of key resources and enablers to be prepared for any of these scenarios. So I won't spend too much time here, but we talked about the facilities modifications, prepping for sanitizing stations so that we can have implement our hygiene protocols. The development of signage in multiple languages so that we can reinforce those practices. Procuring all the appropriate supplies, health and safety supplies, having communication strategies in advance over the summer, again, in multiple languages, using multiple platforms to be able to let people know what we're doing and be able to manage through this challenging times with clear information. The facilities analysis I mentioned, to the points we've made around having a process to determine the number of students who would opt out from the socially distanced scenario, to also the same for staff in figuring out those transportation needs. And lastly, thinking about how do we really maximize. We're not sure that one-to-one would be an ideal state, but that's a significant resource investment and not sure that we'll be able to get there. But how do we maximize technology access for all of our learners, so pre-K to 5, as well as students at adult ed, for whom we don't have one-to-one access currently. And then thinking about, you know, how do we really, well, these are bold strategies and we do want to reinvent, we recognize the difficult place everybody is at. And so being clear about how do we implement these strategies in a way that allows people to build capacity over time and for us to continue to adjust, building in feedback loops throughout this work so that we have constant mechanisms to be able to implement, pause, reflect, and adjust throughout the year as we navigate what is sure to be a very uncertain year. So those are things we're building in. And then I'll shout out this last piece of online curriculum resources. I think, you know, this has come through specific, you know, both to the consistency points that have been named, but as well in terms of teacher feedback of, you know, they're managing so much in terms of trying to maintain connection with students, right? Because they're not just right in front of them, and figure out where they need and delivering curriculum in a new way. And so our ability to be able to help provide them tools and resources so that they can focus on the connection to kids and the delivery to kids as opposed to curriculum development, you know, has been an ask that we've heard clearly. And so appreciate some of the investments around our curriculum scale up to be able to help facilitate that. I want to go ahead and preempt and throw in the conversation about the city rec and other after-school programs so that, you know, Member Thompson had asked before. So I've had an initial conversation with rec, and there had been conversations prior to that about the summer. So they are planning a summer program. I believe they're anticipating, you know, it's about 145 children, enrolling 145 children. Serving them at, and this is K to 5, serving them at East End, Riverton, and Rowe will be the 3 summer sites. And they have a variety of health and safety protocols that they'll be implementing there as well. And we've begun the conversation and have committed to kind of weekly connections to think about what it may look like for them to complement what we are doing in the fall. So obviously we don't know yet what we're doing in the fall, so just maintaining that dialogue, and that I really have appreciated the conversation I had thus far where they were really creative, particularly in thinking about the socially distanced scenario. That's, you know, the thorniest one for us, about how they might be able to help complement what we do to be able to create greater, you know, greater amounts of time that children would be cared for, because we know the pressure for families around getting back to work and managing childcare. So they were really creative in thinking beyond what the current, you know, just their standard kind of after school program model is to be able to complement whichever school scenario we're enacting. They have as well pushed back their registration deadline. Traditionally it's July 1, and they have pushed that back to August 1, just out of, you know, and that was prior to even our conversations, but out of recognition that they're not sure what they're going to offer students and families and what they'll be enrolling for. And I think it gives us a great opportunity to continue that kind of collaboration. We'll certainly having some of those conversations with organizations like Learning Works, that is also doing summer programming with our students. They will be doing that virtually, and conversations about the after school programs that they run as well. So with that, let us pause and see what questions you all have about where we're at in our planning process for the fall.
I don't see any hands raised right now, but if anyone has any questions, I had one that, oh, look at everybody jumped up. Never mind. We'll let the board members speak first. We'll go to Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Chair. So I was just taking notes. To be perfectly honest, these are my thoughts. I am so blown away and enthusiastically excited just to know of all this hard work that you've been doing. And it wasn't just like, oh no, we're just going to go back to normal. We're going to, you know, work hard to open back up and we'll be fine. I mean, you know, I'm so relieved. It's just so much work that you've put into this so far. I'm just so impressed. And I do want to say thank you. And I loved, Fiona, when you were talking about constantly asking why are we teaching this? Why do we need to do this? Do we need to continue to do it this way? It is a whole new world. It really, truly is. And it can be seen as scary and fearful, and we're just going to keep to what we know, or it could crack it all open and say, now it's time to really get to making this. And thank goodness we have a roadmap. We have the Portland Promise. We have have it down. You know, we've been talking about it for years now, and now it's time to really put it to the test more than ever. And so I really appreciate you talking about that and referring to that and saying that that you're really looking at being flexible. I mean, it's an unknown. It's a huge unknown for everyone. We don't know. And just to admit that and say, this is what we're going to be trying. We're going to continually to monitor, like you said, Erin, to checking, is this working? Is it not? We don't know. And I think my takeaway from what you were talking about is all I could keep thinking of is purposeful learning. If we can make sure that everything is moving, in alignment for purposeful learning, so that a kid, not just the staff and teachers can say, why am I teaching this? But then the student can say, this is why I'm learning this right now. This is the purpose of this learning. And then they'll make them more engaged, hopefully, too. But I think you're on the right track. And honestly, you're the experts. You're the ones on the ground. And I just honestly just want to move out of the way and just see what I think of it almost like in a magical moment almost, where it can be, which I just want to trust and put the faith in what you were just talking about. I think there's a lot of great energy behind it, and I really appreciate that, because it sucks. I mean, I hate to say that word, but I think for my kids, I hear it all the time. It's a hard time right now, and I do appreciate you looking at it as an opportunity and consistently. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? And who are we reaching in this? And creating that way to catch people when they need to be caught is critical. So thank you very much. I don't really have any questions. I think you're on a great trajectory into the unknown, honestly. But I think when you're saying want it to look different than what it has been, I say go for it. I really do. I mean, I think it's obviously based on even what we started off with, it's not been working as is. So this is a great opportunity. I think of it that way, and I just want to be as supportive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morioni. We'll go to Ms. Figdor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I wanted to also say that this work is really inspiring to me, and I want to thank you all for it would have been a lot easier to just figure out how to get back to school, rather than stepping back and thinking about how can we re-envision school to actually reduce our opportunity gaps and start to make more progress achieving our equity goals and better meet our students' needs. So thank you. It's really exciting to see where you're headed. I had one quick question, which was I'm wondering in terms of the health and safety protocols, if you considered, and I recognize how tricky this could be, but if you considered taking both staff and students' temperatures before they entered the buildings.
So, yeah, we have discussed that, definitely. Certainly, Tina, our nurse Vayus, and the nurse team has has opinions about that. So that's a consideration. I think our initial, though not final, decision by any means has been we see a number of logistical challenges with that in terms of what that might mean for entry and exit procedures and things like that. Not to mention kind of the costs associated with procuring all that equipment. And we see ultimately potentially more value in having a really strong protocols around symptom checks and communication around that. So that's part of how we've been managing in our current environment. As Ms. McLucas can speak to, with staff that we have that's currently working. And so we've talked about different strategies, particularly if we're in that socially distant scenario where, people might, we might utilize school messenger to provide reminders in multiple languages of the symptoms and so forth, so that we can be really proactive. And we feel like that may be ultimately a more effective practice for us than the temperature checks. And that's also saying we've talked through, and again, It didn't show up at this level of detail, but does in the other doc, of having, very specific procedures for if somebody during the day starts to feel unwell. And so isolation rooms for them, the temperature and the protocols we'd implement if somebody was at school and started to not feel well. So we think the combination of those things may get us, additional, or, would be able to support our health and safety practices. But that's not a final decision. We know that there will be potentially guidance coming from the state and CDC that will, of course, be consistent with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Victor. We'll go to Ms. Thompson now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will echo, I guess, what everybody else has said, and it's amazing the amount of work already that has gone into, not only are you doing the distance learning and everything that's gone into that, but then also thinking of the next step without really knowing where we're all going. So thank you so much. I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions. One is around other districts and idea sharing and what's happening with that. And then I have a couple follow-ups to that.
Yep. No, that's a great question. Thank you. And Javier, feel free to weigh in on this. One of the things that I've come to appreciate is the level of coordination and collaboration amongst Cumberland and some York County districts. So Javier has, I'm not sure, at one point it was 3 times a week of a regular call with superintendents from those. Sorry, Javier?
It's now weekly.
Now weekly, yeah. But at the height of things, it was 3 times a week, but weekly coordination calls with superintendents around the region. So we have already shared, gotten some examples. I've seen, initial brainstorm thinking from Gorham, from South Portland. Yarmouth has a process. They don't have any deep, they have of their planning process. So there's a high level of kind of collaboration and coordination locally. So, and I think, one of the things, and we'll see as well how things move forward, but there's been a strong commitment to be, kind of in partnership and moving together on many of these moves, because we know that many of our students and families, in particular our staff, right, don't all live in Portland and, experience, the decision that a neighboring district may make about school and school closure, will impact them and their ability to, do work for us. So there's a lot of communication in that regard as well. There's also been a weekly high school principals meeting that a number of high school leaders have participated in regularly. So again, high school principals from around the region have been connecting weekly, more focused on just how we're managing the current reality, but another collaboration structure.
And I will just add to that, in addition to the local coordination, obviously there's coordination with the DOE and, the guidance that they're developing. So, last week there was a preliminary set of foundational principles that the DOE sent around to superintendents, which Aaron also received and has brought into the mix. And we're also looking at and monitoring everything that's happening across the country today. ASA, the Association of School Administrators, sent out their survey and initial considerations for school reopenings. So we're also, and Aaron mentioned this in his presentation as well, we're obviously looking at all of the things that are happening in places that are going before us.
Okay. And the 2 other questions I have is, one is, will any of the new protocols, I'm not sure if this would be a factor or not, but are any of the new protocols something that we have to negotiate with our unions on, the safety? I know that you're talking about safety and so on and so forth, and taking leave and so on. So I'm just curious as to how does that play out with our contracts that we have in place, and do we have to come to the table and negotiate any of the new protocols that we might put in place?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not far enough down the road to have enough clarity, particularly I would set aside the health and safety issues, but whether there are different educator roles or implications that might impact work hours days, years, so, it's been awesome to have Carrie as a core part of this team from the get-go. And we've recognized that we may need, to come to the table, but we're not far enough yet along the planning to have something to negotiate yet, right, in terms of what that would be, in terms of which scenario we might enact and where we would get. But we've raised that up, that may be a need. In terms of the health and safety protocols, we are building out, following up on the survey. Bart Stoddard, our wonderful HR director, has prepared kind of a process for people to request accommodation. So, I think that is even beyond the contract, certainly leveraging elements of the contract, but in terms of some of the legislation that was passed around COVID. The ability to access leave for that. We have been implementing that, and certainly moving forward, the process people would be able to go through kind of a reasonable accommodation process for health and safety needs and potentially childcare needs. So recognizing that's not the only health and safety concerns is not the only limitation that might prevent staff from being able to come back if their children aren't able to return to school. So that staffing challenge is, is going to be critical data for us to have. It's like the staffing data, the student and family return data, and the facilities capacity are three key data points to let us know what we really will be able to do come the fall.
So I guess one thing I was just asked, and then I have one other question, but is I'm glad that Carrie is involved in representing the PEA, but also if with our ongoing conversations that you guys are having, in my opinion, again, if you haven't thought about it, which I'm sure you have, but is to include the other units, but also the base, where we have our bus drivers, our food service workers, our secretaries, that really the inclusion of that wide base of people, I think is really important. So the PEA, yes, brings a certain focus, but also, our on the ground bus drivers, etc. So I would just ask that they be included in the conversation. And so working at Maine Med, they put into place, and I'm not sure if we can even remotely do anything, similar. Of course, we have limited resources, but every day when workers go into work, we have to, and I go in once a week and try to get in there more than I'm allowed to, but we have to do a self-reporting. So it's almost a survey that we go in to an app, and then it gives us a clearance. And the hospital, through the Maine Health System, are doing monitoring. And granted, it is self-reporting, but it does give a lot of good data in regards to staffing as well, and how we need to staff. So I just didn't know if possibly, we could think of a vendor or something along those lines as well. We only have a couple people at the door. All employees go through one door, and we exit from another door. So we have, protocols in place for that. There's no negotiation. You go in this door, you go out that door. You come in, you sanitize, you leave, you sanitize, you leave your mask on. When you get off the shuttle, and you don't take it off until you get to your car. So just things like that, to think about. And hopefully, I know we have some really talented nurses on our staff, but that also, we check in from our work with our health clinics as well. But the last, I guess, the question I have, but not really a question, but so back in the day, and it looks like you may have touched upon this, the AABB scheduling. And I know that when there was in the heyday, our numbers were really high at the high school level. And so we had to run an AM and a PM school. And I didn't know whether or not that was something you guys were also thinking about, that AABB was representative of that. We have done that in the past. We did have to obviously work with staff and negotiate that. But I just wanted to know if that was really a lot of thinking going into that.
Yeah, I think there's, so yes, that is definitely one of the potential considerations. So AM, PM scheduling, the AA kind of off day BB would be like kind of 2 days on, 3 days remote learning kind of schedule. And even then kind of like essentially a week on, week off, that's gotten some traction in other countries in particular. I haven't heard anybody within the US doing that. But so all of those, and that's part of what we want to gather data, right now we're gathering data from families around. I think, a big one of the key considerations is how that, any of those scenarios are going to be challenging for families, period. But is there any kind of data we might discern that might be beneficial to one or the other? I would say, I think we have, reservations about the AM/PM scheduling, that, both in terms of the demands on the cleaning and disinfecting protocols in between sessions, as well as the transportation demands to be doubling the amount of transportation we have to do in a day, even though it's not necessarily a volume of kids, but doubling the number of runs essentially. So I think our initial kind of lean away has been leaning away from an AM/PM model, and recognizing kind of the stretch of time that would be for staff. We feel like there are a number of obstacles to that, but we haven't eliminated it as an option at this point, just because that's where we're at and we want to get some further input.
Okay, and I did fib. I had found one more question that I had, and you talked a little bit about the summer and the rec program coming up, and about 145 children would be served K through 5, East End, Row, and Riverton. I guess my question, and maybe it's more of a Javier question to the superintendent, but the costs involved, parents and families are going to be paying the City of Portland, the rec department, for those services. And I'm wondering if there's been conversations with the city manager or the finance department about shared costs in regards to disinfecting and protocols and training and all that stuff. And if there's been conversations about sharing the costs, especially where the city, takes in the revenue from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are working closely with the city on this, and they've expressed interest in doing whatever it is that needs to happen to make sure that we can run the program. That is the revenue that they get from that program is to run the program. So it's not like it's not a money maker. It's something that that pays for the staff, and so I don't think that there's a ton of additional money, and there's not a ton of additional costs involved on our end, but we're definitely willing to have those conversations. And I know that John would be amenable to anything that made sense.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm all done, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Let's go to Ms. Bondo.
Thank you. I have a few questions and one comment in the end. Just want to thank the team because I see we have a map road to move on some of those returning, opening on fall or stay remotely. So really thank you for the team. My first question is around the survey. I see we have to get some survey from families. So I wonder if those survey will be online, and are we going to display those survey and collect those survey from families? You want me to go through my questions and then you can be able to answer here. And then also I see on the technology, I mean, some ideas for training for families on different technologies. Want to see. I know but knowing that some of the families don't have. I do. Can you hear me?
We're having a hard time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. We can hear you now, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. So just the way the training for families around technologies, because knowing that a lot of families, they just don't have any device and any technology going on. So maybe go a little more further on thinking how those training will be happening. And the third question is about transportation. We know our high school are using the metro transportation. So if any talking point with the metro are the safety of students from high school will be happening in case we're going back to face-to-face in fall. Those are my three questions. My last one is going to be just a comment before you answer my question, is what Fiona just mentioned. I want us to think about it as a institution, then we represent the whole student. Because when the learning experience strategy, and I want the team to consider exactly on the social emotion learning,
because when we see, and we need to make sure we know that our students of color and their lives won't be the same if we return in full. So that means the area of the social emotion can just make sure that we have enough social worker, we have enough team to make sure that the support one-on-one to try to build it back. They can be considered the insider and not outsider, because we are there at the school to prepare and to empower students. So the social emotion is really the key capital for the next return and fall, to make sure that if the social emotion is well taken care, they will be able and open to get all the knowledge on the academic curriculum. Otherwise, it's going to be just a waste of money and a waste of time for the teachers. So the social emotion, I want you to really consider that the support need to be increased for those specific population, because I saw a lot of change from my household from a week ago. Everything has shifted automatically on everything. So I have to build them back. So consider the large population that we serve as a diversity and that social emotion going on. And I really want to recommend the team to take a profound consideration how that social emotion learning will be the priority key for the returning school. In case we're returning, if it's not on a remote system, how the social emotion will be taken care. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Yeah, certainly, we regarded it as essential for the return prior to the events of the past week, just with the challenges of being isolated and so forth, and only exacerbated by, what we've all experienced over this past week. So appreciate that encouragement and kind of direction. Let me work back real quick. So Metro, we do have some conversations going with Metro. Javier, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that briefly. Some of that has to do with some of the mechanisms for payment and things like that are part of that consideration.
Yeah, I met with Metro last week to talk about what we were thinking for reopening and what they were thinking. So they expect that by September they will try to be back to full buses. Right now they're only running buses with 10 passengers at the most. So they're hoping to have full buses, but with no standing room. And so, we're going to have to work through the implications of that if we are in, everybody back to school mode. I think that will, that could present a problem. They're also changing their fare collections. So they're just doing the same things that we're talking about, that Board Member Thompson talked about at Maine Med, in terms of, coming in one door, going out the other door. They will no longer be transacting any cash or cards or anything along those lines. So everything being operated from an app or a credit card type that's scannable. So I think there are significant changes on the way, but they expect to be operational and, transporting our students in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Your second question was around training around the technology, as I understood it. And so, we have a number of thoughts. I mean, one, that it needs to actually be available in multiple formats to be able to support folks, and certainly in multiple languages, so that there would be both written guidance, that could be able to be, disseminated and, available to folks that people like our incredible parent community specialists, could be able to utilize. That we would have stuff online in terms of demonstrating that, and that might be a little bit for more of the beyond. We've also thought about how we could be able to have, kind of series of video things available through, our, the public access station, so that's another medium to be able to kind of access and see how to be able to use it. We've confronted challenges from a wide range of challenges, every single one you could imagine around technology, from not knowing how to turn it on and get it rolling, right, to more complex things about accessing Google Classroom. So it's a wide range, and part of our, I think a realization, not a realization, but just an opportunity now with some time, is to be able to narrow. We've heard this from staff, we've heard it from parents and students as well, that in jumping into it, everybody was kind of doing the best they could, and that's certainly been 100% the case, but we would really benefit from narrowing potentially, and making some system-wide decisions around what platforms we were using, so that we could organize and concentrate our resources in the training and development that we'll do. So that's a few thoughts about how we might deploy and make that training accessible to a lot of folks. And then the last question was the survey. So we have the parent survey going out tomorrow night. Grace and her team have been awesome partners in helping to lead, kind of pushing that message out. I believe it is a web-based survey, but I'm not 100% sure. So Grace is on in terms of the method that we're going to distribute those surveys, if you want to weigh in on that.
Is Grace on the call?
If not, I can confirm and follow up here, but
I know we usually send it out via school messenger. I don't know the details of it, so.
Okay, can I have some details on our way to make sure that we have we can reach out enough parents across the district and have the right, at least close to the 85% on the collect data, then we can make sure that we have everybody's voice included?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, no, and that's, I'm really mindful of that.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Let's go to Mr. Atkinson. I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Burke, my bad.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. A few weeks ago, I had asked what we were doing to transform our approach to education, because if not now, when? And at that time, Malia told me about this process and shared its approach. And I was very encouraged then, and I remain so. And this approach takes courage and humility on the part of all involved, and especially our leadership, and I appreciate them creating the space and facilitation to do it this way. Our normal before the pandemic wasn't working and is nothing to return to. I stand with the chair and the superintendent and others tonight that have held up that we must do the work needed to be an anti-racist institution instead of a racist one. I think we all here on the panelist side are generally aligned in that purpose and our desired outcomes for equity. Where we might differ is in the processes or strategies to get to those outcomes. There isn't one way to get there that I know of, and in fact, there's no roadmap that I know of, as no one else in the country that I'm aware of has fully transformed a public school district to be anti-racist and equitable yet, but I'm encouraged that we're on a path. It's a reason I'm grateful for this process. It's sophisticated, and by design, it challenges us to name our assumptions up front and over again to be clear in what is guiding our decisions. Is it our assumptions and biases, or is it because we're listening to the people most affected by the thing that we're designing? Our process that the assistant superintendents and Kippy Smith are leading is both helping people learn a new problem-solving approach and to enact it at the same time, and that's really tough, and I just want to commend them for doing that work. And it's moving forward our values of being creative and innovative, as well as courageous. As has been said, this will be challenging. It will require for us to do things differently. It will require courage by all of us on the board. It will require willingness and change by our staff and teachers. And one thing that I've been most encouraged by is not only the leadership that I'm seeing from the assistant superintendents and Kippy, but it's everybody who's on the design team who keep showing up and they keep speaking their truths. And they keep speaking up for their communities, and it's getting us better outcomes thus far. And while that's happening, we're constantly keeping focus on the central design focus, which is designing for those who are furthest away from opportunities. There's a lot of details to come, of course, and for anyone listening who's not well steeped in the edu-speak and acronyms that we use pretty freely here, I'd like to say so much of what I've heard tonight as summary, as well as what I've seen on this design team, really does represent hopes and concerns that I've heard from parents that I represent. And I'm, again, encouraged that we'll see that in a final form, too. One comment in response to Member Thompson, I just wanted to say that there is, I just want to hold up that Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend is holding so much information all at once. And so this is not to say that he missed something, but just to help out. There's also an AM and PM scenario that was floating that was about morning in person and afternoon remote that was suggested by one of our parents and a member of our multilingual staff that mirrored ways in which she's familiar with education and that others in some of our communities may be familiar with and might be a pathway to get traction with folks that we're most concerned with. So that's it. I don't have any questions. I just want to hold up all the folks doing this work and thank you. I'm really proud of the work so far, proud of the district. Thank you, Superintendent, for making space for this to be the way we approach it. Thank you to the Assistant Superintendents for guiding and holding space for this, and everybody that's showing up to figure out this work.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Let's go now back to Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone who's been involved in this work. I just wanted to put a pitch in for something that was part of the presentation. Was one of the bullets around communication and being really clear with folks in the community about what our plans are and what the different scenarios are as they come into clarity. You know, there's a lot of permutations here. We've got 3 different sort of high level, you know, scenarios that we're looking at. And then, you know, there's the full range of students from pre-K to adult ed. And so that's a lot of permutations. So, you know, I hope that as we come, you know, to more clarity on what things are looking like coming into the school year, just throughout the process, as transparent as we can be and as much as we can put information in front of parents, in front of students, so that they can say, okay, you know, I'm a parent of a pre-K student and we're coming back into a remote learning situation. What does that mean for me? Just so we can be really direct, just because there's just this wide range of scenarios, and so that can be hard for folks to navigate. So that's all I want to say. Thank you to everyone who's been so involved in putting all this plan together. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. We'll go back to Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. And I don't know if this question for the superintendent or for our HR director, but I know we don't have a crystal ball yet. But I was just curious if you were looking at plans for increases in retirements or resignations from staff, depending on the protocol that we put in place. I know we had quite a few retirements when we went to a new computer system about 8 years ago at Maine Medical Center. It was a lot for people to take on for some folks, so they decided to, you know, retire or, you know, just move on to something else. And I see this as the magnitude of this is so much larger. So I didn't know whether or not we would also be, you know, checking in with people on their level of comfort and whether we thought that there would be, again, increases in the retirements or resignations and what our deadline currently was for retirements.
So I don't know, Barb, if you want to jump in on that, but I think Aaron mentioned that we are sending a survey. And so, you know, part of the survey is asking people's level of comfort with returning and what types of things would need to be in place to make them, you know, increase their level of comfort with returning to work. I think that there's always the potential, as you said, this is a fairly significant change, that there will be a number of people who decide that they want to leave, whether it's via the retirement route or, you know, resignation route, that, you know, this type of, large scale change moves people to make large decisions that they might have been postponing. But we don't have any, as you said, we don't have a crystal ball. And so there's no way for us to know. So all we have is data, and that's what we're in the process of trying to gather now, so that we'll have a better sense of what will, potentially happen. I think if you recall during the budget process, as we talked about, some of the expenses that we envision having to take on, it's the costs associated with multiple HR things, whether it's large scale payouts of employees going, retiring with a large number of, benefits and things along those lines, or, increased costs with unemployment and things along those lines. We envision all of those things being the kinds of expenses that we don't currently have budgeted, but we will need to address next year.
And what is our deadline for retirements? I'm sorry, I don't remember what that date was.
So I can add to that. Yeah. There is no deadline. So the only thing that does exist is that educators are required to give a 30-day notice. So once we hit August 1st, that will change things for next year. But in general, there is no deadline for retirements.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you all. I don't see any other hands raised. Some of the questions that I was thinking of were addressed. I was thinking initially about the metro, and I'm glad that came up. I guess this is not necessarily a question, but just throwing it out there as hopefully part of the thinking process as we move forward. Should we end up moving in one of these scenarios that has our high school students going back into the buildings, and we have families who depend on the metro transportation but might be hesitant to put their kids in that mode of transportation, it'd be good for us to maybe explore backup scenarios. So I don't know if it's even logistically possible that if we're doing some combination of these, if our buses would then allow us to transport high school students. Again, just anticipating that some families might also not have the comfort of putting their kids in metro buses. The only other question, or rather request that I had was, of course, just to, as direction or guidance rather comes in from DOE and CDC, that of course that you keep the board up to date with that, particularly if anything comes in during the month of July when we're not going to be meeting, and the point of making a decision gets a little bit closer. So of course, and I wholly expect that the superintendent will keep us informed of anything like that should direction be provided by DOE. I think that's all that I had. So if I don't see any other hands raised, I think we can move on to the next section. We have the food services update. Do we go straight to Jane, or you set us up, Superintendent?
Jane, you need setting up, or you can?
Oh, I'm all set.
You got it. There you go.
Good evening, all. Thank you for having me here this evening. Food Services has done a lot of pivoting during this COVID-19 situation. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. So currently, we are operating 11 meal distribution sites. Customers at those sites are receiving breakfast and lunch daily, and then on Fridays, we're offering a double meal. So from March 18th through May 30th, we have done a total of 94,000 meals, both student and adult meals. So hopefully on Thursday, we'll hit that number of 100,000 meals that we've served since the March 18th startup of this meal service. You can go ahead, Aaron, to the next slide. So what this means for the food service department is that we are looking at a shortfall of approximately $400,000. This is due to the difference of meals served while we were in school to when we were out of school. The food service department only receives reimbursements on meals served. So our revenue is down, and I put a little example down here. So in May of 2019, we served 123,000 national school lunch meals and almost 7,500 CACFP meals, and received 332,000 in reimbursement from the federal government. And in this May, we served 43,000 meals under the summer food service program and totaled $127,000 in reimbursement. So most of the shortfall is between the amount of meals that we are serving. So as we transition from school year to summer, we are continuing with our current sites unless participation drops off. We will transition Rowe and Portland High to the Boys and Girls Club, and they'll operate those sites at Sagamore Village and at their clubhouse on Cumberland Ave. We'll close East End due to a low participation. We have added a Bayside Anchor site, which is in Kennedy Park. We did that on May 4th. And next Monday on June 8th, we're adding a site at Munjoy South Playgrounds. The Peaks Island meal site will close on June 30th due to the waiver expiring, federal waiver expiring. Last week, we added a mobile bus route. So we are, with transportation's help, sending out 9 buses daily, and they are distributing meals to households directly to home delivery. We have about 300 meals that we're serving that way currently. We anticipate that we'll have additional sites at North Deering Garden and the YMCA come later on in June. And we will provide meals for the students for the Learning Works site who is doing Learning Works via the buses, and we will serve meals with the recreation departments starting in July. We're also proposing that we discontinue serving adult meals because we are currently receiving no reimbursement for those meals. Go ahead, Aaron. So looking ahead with meal service as we transition back to school or whatever we come back to in the fall, food service is ready to work with the district and figure out what's going to work best depending on the choices that the district makes for the fall. We have an opportunity to send meals home with students. We can continue with our curbside pickup option. I anticipate that the mobile bus service would still be available. We can do cafeteria service, we can do classroom feeding, and we can do any or all of the combinations above to whatever the district needs. I do have a couple of concerns about existing regulations and how they might be problematic. Working within, I don't believe that we'll be able to work with 2 different programs with the federal guidelines. That wouldn't allow us to feed students in school and outside of school at the same time. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Currently, under the current summer food service rules, we don't charge for meals. All students are receiving meals free of charge with reimbursement from the federal government. And I hope to see that continue in the fall, but we would need to stay under the summer food service rules for that to happen. And that's usually only for when school is out of session. So again, we'll have to see what the federal government says about how they're going to mandate service. And it'll be very interesting to watch what happens in other states as they open prior to Maine. I also am listening and learning from other people and a part of a national call that happens every couple of weeks with food service directors from all over the country. And we're sharing ideas about what people are doing in their school districts. So it's really interesting to hear what other people have to say and to learn from what other people are doing prior. So I want to thank you all, and I'm welcome to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Jane. Guys, if we have any questions, remember to use your raise your hand feature. I'll get started in case this always happens. The moment I like get ready to throw one out there, I will go to Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Jane, so very much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
It's unbelievable what you and your staff, when you say things like, oh, we're just going to move this site, or we're just going to add the mobile drop off, and it's so much work. I mean, just to even maintain the daily schedule, I just wanted just a huge, huge appreciation. Thank you so much. My question was, it was a community member that asked me about, they were saying, why shouldn't school be just around education? And why are we adding more financially for feeding the students as well? And of course, my response has always been, we need, students can't learn if they're not well fed. But then they were like, but shouldn't the city and or state and or federal government be supplementing enough that we wouldn't have to take any out of the school budget for that? So I just wanted to ask, if somebody would ask that of you, how would you best respond to that? Because I basically said the same thing I said before, which is we cover what we need to cover when we don't get it from these other sources. So
ideally, I would like to say that I don't feel that the federal government has kept up with the needs of the program. It was set up a very long time ago in a situation that was part of the war, and it was about students not being nutritional, receiving the nutrition that they needed. And I really don't think that they've kept up with the needs of today's costs in the current structure of the program. I think that hopefully will be a silver lining of how, and something else that comes out of this is as food service departments across the country are doing what I'm doing. We're feeding in backpacks, we're feeding on curbs, we're doing drive-through service. Everybody's doing this to feed the kids in their communities. And the reimbursement rate doesn't show what it is that what we're doing and the costs that it incurs. And I'm very thankful that the district is able to pick up some of the costs that I can't, and when there is a shortfall. We work really hard to not have that happen, but in these situations, it's nice to have that, to know that the district will step up and help the community and help us feed the community.
Can I just add something to that? And first, I want to echo the thanks to Jane. She works tirelessly. I swear, I think we talked at 8 o'clock this morning. She was sitting in that exact same place. And, it's, she does an incredible amount of work. I do want to say that, this year has been somewhat, not somewhat unique. It's absolutely been unique. And so we've had fixed costs that we've had to carry, even though the revenue did not accompany that. And so when you look at that deficit that Jane talked about, that's the deficit that comes from, basically having made a commitment to all of the people that work in that department, regardless of whether we were bringing in the revenue. And, I hate to say this, at the same time that we're celebrating the importance of this work and the tremendous effort that it's taken. But if we were in a situation like this next year, where we were not able to bring in the revenue that goes with that, we would also need to look at staffing, which is the bulk of the costs associated with that deficit. So, when I hear people say like, well, but you're not serving as many meals, so you're saving all that food money. And we are saving some food money, but that's not where the bulk of our costs are. The bulk of our costs are tied into the people that do the amazing work to make sure that that food is ready, that that food is, waiting for people when they get there, that the food is, is tasty and all of those things. And so going forward, we will be in a very different situation because we cannot make that same commitment. And you've heard me say this throughout the budget process. We need to just, sort of get ourselves used to the idea that if we are in any of those multiple scenarios that we talked about in the earlier part of this presentation, that will have an impact on the way that we're staffed and, the full employment that we currently offer.
Thank you again, Jane.
Welcome.
Yo, we'll go to Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to raise up food service, Jane's work. I've seen it pretty intimately in previous parts of my professional life and more recently as a parent and a school board member. And we, everywhere in the district, we do too much with too little. And I don't think it's seen or felt, well, I don't want to say it that way. It's really precarious how that happens in food service. The amount of work the folks there do with the amount of staffing they have, the amount of reimbursement that they get, all that is, it's so thin. It's so thin. And so just thank you. And yes to everything Javier just said about what it could mean in the future. That's all true at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. I don't see any other hands raised. Jane, I'll say, I've said it multiple times, and this goes back for all the conversations that we've had with the Food Fuels Learning group. Your work really is incredible, and what your team has been able to do over the last few months, and even this preparation looking forward, it really is. It's amazing just to see it. It goes in on par with all the amazing things that we've seen the rest of the district do under such difficult times. I just want one comment, not so much a question, but seeing the shortfalls that we've experienced so far, looking at next year, any of the scenarios that we discussed as opening could potentially continue to have these same shortfalls in revenue. So I just want the board to be aware that just like they were explained a moment ago, these were really unforeseen circumstances that led to what we're doing. But come next year, should we see an extended period of time where we're seeing these revenue losses, we're going to have to figure things out and might have to implement some changes. And of course, that's at this point way too early to act on that, being that we have no idea what it's going to look like next year. But again, that loss of revenue for me, that's huge. That's a couple of months worth and almost $500,000. That's a lot of money. And again, with the theme of the night that I've brought in here, I'll remind you guys that the fear of increased costs when we restart the school year is something that we began to sound the alarm when we finish our budget process. So just be aware of that number in that presentation. Like I said, it stood out to me. I don't have anything else, and I don't see any more hands raised. So I think we've come to the end of, there's nothing else after this. No, we've come to the end. Do you want to close off, Superintendent? Mute.
Just to, again, thank Jane, but also thank Aaron and Malia and their amazing teams for the great work that they're doing. As you said, it's been 2 months that feel to me like 2 years, but it would not have been possible without the tremendous work of this great leadership team and their ability to bring the right people into the room to make important decisions. You saw Aaron and Malia today, but Barb, Grace, our IT team, everybody has really worked extremely hard. And, our school-based leaders, all of our, teachers, custodians, all of our operations departments, they've all been working nonstop to be able to get us through to the end of this year. And now they will continue to do that to get us ready for the start of the following year. So this is, I think maybe third or fourth update that we've done on our continuity of instruction over the past 3 months. And, I just want to once again thank the team for everything that they've done to get us to this point.
Thank you, Superintendent. So we'll move on to our next, I'm putting up my agenda, sorry. Move on to our next item. We have old business. Excuse me, consideration and action to revise the proposed 2020-2021 school year calendar. Is there a motion?
So moved.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who that was.
It was Sarah.
All right, moved by Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Figdor. Superintendent, you want to set us up on this? You're muted.
We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Policy ICA requires that we present a school calendar to the board for approval each year. And as you know, the establishment of the calendar and the student day is a matter of educational policy. On March 5th, you approved a proposed calendar for the 2020-21 school year. And then during the distribution of the calendar, we were alerted to the fact that the total number of student and teacher attendance days in the approved calendar did not total up to the required 175 days, leave alone the 176 days that we intended to have and the 183 teacher days that goes with that. We realized that the error stemmed from the number of days that were included in the month of June. We got a little peppy and ready to go on summer break. And so we were short a couple of days. So those have been added back into the calendar that you have in the packet. And so the calendar has been adjusted to extend student attendance all the way through to June 11th. And that makes the last day for staff at this point, June 14th. And as I mentioned, there's a copy of the new proposed calendar in your packet. That's it.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none. Is there any public comment on the motion? See, you know what? I'm sorry. I don't think I went over the meeting protocols at the start of the meeting. I don't anticipate there'd be public comment, but I should say, if anyone that is joining us from the public under the attendees, if you want to address the board for public comment, just use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and I'll call your name. You'll have 3 minutes to address the board. And we are on just as a reminder, we are on a old business consideration and action to revise the proposed 2020 and 21 school year calendar, asking for public comment on that. But again, since I didn't go over the public comment rules at the beginning of the meeting, I wanted to put that out there. So since I don't see any hands raised in the public comment, we'll close that and come back to board discussion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. We'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of approving, excuse me, sorry guys. My computer's frozen. There it goes, sorry. All right, all those in favor, please indicate whether you're in favor of revising the proposed 2020 and 21 school year calendar, and the superintendent will call the roll.
Mr. Atkinson,
Yes.
Mr. Balfont,
Yes.
Ms. Blondell,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Figdor,
Yes.
Ms. Morioni,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow,
Yes.
and Chair Rodriguez.
Yes. Thank you all. All right, next, new business, consideration and action to approve the superintendent's proposed modification to FY20 spring co-curricular stipends. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Spector. Would the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Yes. Erin, do you have the presentation? Thank you. So I lost my notes. Here we go. Okay. So as the motion says, I'm asking you to ratify the decision to reduce compensation for our spring coaches and co-curricular sponsors to 1/3 of the contracted amount in response to the cancellation of the spring season by the Maine Principals Association. As you know, we included this item as part of the co-curricular presentation at the May 5th board meeting. And I recognize that at the time, it may have been unclear to some board members that this was an information item rather than a proposal for discussion. So after discussions with board members after that meeting and further discussion with Chair Rodriguez, we collectively decided that we would bring this item to the board as an action item to ratify my previous decision, which has already been implemented. So I want to spend a moment talking a little bit about this tonight. So first, I'd like to talk about my authority to make that decision, because I know that was a point of concern, contention. So policy BDD outlines, is that slide up? Yeah, okay, sorry. The board superintendent relationship. And the policy specifically outlines that the superintendent is the educational leader of the district and that the board's role is to provide direction through policy, through objectives and goals, and to otherwise give the superintendent full administrative authority and support for properly discharging duties, while obviously holding the superintendent responsible for acceptable results. So I think that that was an important policy that I wanted to make sure that, that the board understood that that was what I was operating with. Also, policy CHD specifies that in cases when action must be taken within the Portland Public Schools, and the Portland Board of Public Education has provided no guidelines for administrative action through policy, the superintendent shall have the power to act. So it's really the interplay of those two policies that I used and I use every day in determining whether I, in this particular situation, had the authority to make this decision or, make any of the decisions that I make on a daily basis. So next, I'd like to revisit my decision-making process with you. As I indicated at the May 5th meeting, I understand the importance of deliberation and reflection. I firmly believe that as the officials elected by the community, your insights and reflections are crucial to guiding my actions. And I try to live by that all the time. As you know, I spend a considerable amount of time trying to connect with you, understand what you're hearing, what your concerns are. I'm always there to respond to your concerns and questions. And so I do that while recognizing that on any given day, all of our staff makes many decisions that are only broadly bound by, or sometimes in total absence of board guidance. So and it has to be that way because every decision cannot be brought to the board or brought to me for that matter. That's why we delegate significant responsibilities to our school leaders, to members of my cabinet, to our teachers, and so on. So, obviously not every decision can be made by the board or by the superintendent. And so that was, part of my thinking, but I very much believe that the board's insights as representatives of this community is an important aspect of any decision. And, obviously in this particular case, there's been significant community and board interest in the subject. And so I thought it was appropriate to come back and walk through my decision-making process so that we can, understand where that came from and then, have this ratification vote today. So next, what I'd like to do is just spend a quick minute reviewing the financial context in which I made this decision. So Erin, if you could go to the slide on the losses, and then we have the other one after that. I just want to, walk through the fact that, we're facing, as we've said multiple times today, unprecedented circumstances. And so we, just before that meeting, had reviewed with the Finance Committee both the costs and the possible savings that are associated with having to run remote school as a result of COVID-19. And so these slides show you the costs associated with it, so you can see that that's, roughly $1 million. And then, also the potential offsets, so things that we've been able to not do or or do at a different level, reduced level. And, that was the offset. So that was part of what informed my decision-making. In deciding the actual 33% amount that is where we settled, I was informed by, what the prevailing decisions were in other local districts. So earlier, I believe it was Board Member Thompson asked, to what extent are we coordinating, and as we said then, we now meet weekly. Earlier in the process, we were meeting, 3 times a week, then 2 times a week, and now we're down to once a week that we meet as superintendents in Cumberland County. And, at the time that we announced that decision, every district in Cumberland was either planning to pay a third, which is where we settled, pay nothing, or was undecided at the time. And undecided at the time meant that they were between 0 and a third. Since then, several districts, as we have talked about before, have shifted and evolved their positions. And so this includes the Cumberland Greeley School District, which is paying the full stipend for spring sports, and Gorham and Wyndham are paying 80% to varsity coaches, 50% to assistant coaches, and 20% to middle school coaches. And then Cape Elizabeth and South Portland are both paying 50% to coaches, and in the case of Cape, they're requiring evidence that there was some form of a preseason training program or something, or there was activities that were carried out over the course of the past summer, things along those lines, as a condition for paying that full 50%. Statewide, as you know, and was reported very well by the Portland Press Herald, about half of the state's districts compensated a fraction of the regular stipend. About a quarter of the districts decided to compensate in full, and about a quarter decided not to compensate at all. So we were in that majority of districts that decided to pay a fraction of the total amount. So in the next slide, you see the costs that are associated with each of these options and how that compares to the decisions we made. And so I prepared this slide specifically to request that board member Thompson made, where she wanted to understand what the implications would be of using any of those other scenarios that I've discussed. Obviously, you know, the 100% would be that we would save, you know, we would save nothing. And, you know, but the other two scenarios we've outlined there. So parting from the 173,415, which is the amount associated with the stipends of staff. The next column shows you what the payout would be, and all the way through to the total potential savings. So with that, I will open it up and let you ask any questions you might have.
We haven't any questions?
Trying to get there.
We used the raise your hand features.
Hi, panelists, I do raise hand.
Go ahead, Ms. Thompson. You can talk. There was no one else waiting. Go ahead.
I'm like, where's the raise the hand button? So thank you, Superintendent. And I want to start by saying I greatly appreciate all of the hard work, and you know how much I highly respect all of your hard work. And I feel very thankful to have you here in Portland and for everything that you've done for us. And I also want to thank you for hearing me out. You spent a great amount of time, to your point, of hearing my concerns, and you listened, and I greatly appreciate that. And so for me, questioning this wasn't around feeling like you made a violation or existing legal mandate or policy or procedure. For me, it was more around, I guess, process in which talking to community members, many felt they, the 100% is what they were counting on for their livelihood, et cetera. And some had said that they had done some pre-work, leading up to it. And I think there was a couple people that told me, they had done about 50%. So when I started hearing about the 1/3, I became very concerned because of that fact that the conversations were a surprise to a lot of our staff. And I think one thing that's really important to note is that 64% of those that run our co-curriculars are our staff. And I think they felt a little let down by us. We were talking that week about teacher appreciation, and there were many that didn't feel appreciated, and I don't think that was our intention whatsoever. But I wanted to know, and I'm just going to propose it, and whether there's support or not, but considering I know that there was a lot of expenses put out because of COVID, and I know the financial situation that we are in, and many are living that reality in their lives right now. But I wanted for us to, as a board, potentially explore the payout of the 80-50-20 of the 89,786, which is a difference of $42,000 between the 1/3 in this scenario. And we still have a savings, as the superintendent outlined, of over 83,000, almost 84,000, which is a difference of 34,000. And I think, I feel as though morale-wise, that this would be a better way to go, or a more fair, I guess, way to go. And so I wanted to put that out there, that I really would like us to consider the 80-50-20, just to make things, right by our community and by our staff in the situation that it put in for many people. So I don't know. I know that it wasn't intended for us to make amendments, but that is my intention, is to see if there's support for putting in place the scenario 3 opposed to the scenario 1 as part of this presentation.
So so Ms. Thompson, are you formally proposing an amendment to our motion so that the board can vote on adopting the 80?
Yes, please.
Okay, so is there a second there's a motion on the floor with an amendment for the board to consider adopting scenario 3, the 80-50-20 payment. Is there a second on the motion? I can't see hold up. I can't see all the participants, so Ms. Morioni has seconded. All right, do we need to explain it? It seems pretty straightforward, what Ms. Thompson is requesting as an amendment. So if there's any questions on the amendment, okay, we'll go to Ms. Figdor.
Thank you. I guess I'll start by saying that I strongly support the superintendent's authority in making this decision, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it more, but I don't see it as necessary. That said, I was a collegiate athlete as well as of course, I would go, a high school athlete, and I am uncomfortable with paying assistant coaches at a different rate as the lead coaches. I can tell you just on the teams that I played on, that while responsibilities might have been different, the assistant coaches often, across the board, worked just as hard. So I guess and just admitting it was many years ago now, but I guess I would feel uncomfortable with that rubric, with the basic premise of paying staff who play different roles, all trying to accomplish the co-curriculars together at different rates. That seems like just plainly unfair to me. So I'm sorry, that was discussion and not a question. So I guess my question is there a justification for paying our staff at different rates? In proportion to what they otherwise, the stipend that they otherwise would be receiving.
Are you asking me that, Ms. Figdor, or are you asking?
No, I'm asking the superintendent.
Okay, thank you.
So I believe that, and I'm not a collegiate athlete, so I don't have a great deal of knowledge on this. I believe that 80-50-20 scenario was devised in this particular, this came from Gorham and Wyndham, and that was developed jointly with the athletic director. So I'm assuming that there is a rationale behind it. I can't say that I inquired. It happened after we had already determined to go in the direction of 1/3. It was when I started hearing from some of our staff that, well, so and so is doing this and so is doing that I came to learn of it, but I did not dig deep into what the rationale is. I'm sure there is one. I'm sure that it is. It made sense to the athletic directors in those two communities, but I can't. I don't know what the rationale is. I mean, we obviously pay them differently now. So and I know you know that, so I just want to make sure that everybody does, that we obviously don't pay head coaches and athletic assistants the same level. So this is actually taking that a step further. So but I don't really know the rationale.
We're good with that answer. We'll go to Ms. Bondo.
Yes, thank you. Just have a clarification question about, do we have how many on the spring athletic coaches are employed to the district as a teacher, or how many are outsider? I mean, from
So
outside coach, how many are we talking about?
Yeah, in your packet, there's a sheet that's called Spring 2020 Differential
Okay.
and that shows you exactly how many stipends and how many of them are unfilled, how many are filled, and then the breakdown of how many of those folks are regular staff versus lay coaches that do other things and then work for us as coaches. So I think Board Member Thompson mentioned 64% of the 42 are regular district staff.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Superintendent. I just want to make my comments because I'm not going to support the amendment because I believe about the principle. Then the superintendent is the one who has the authority and the leadership because he brings see the big picture of all expenditures, priorities, and I see everything that is being changing accordingly. And I feel like it's my duty to try to respect what he has chosen because he brings see the direction than me taking a position because of that. Because when I look at the 64%, is that most of those athletic are employed, and I know the situation is so critical, but we need to look at also all the expenses and everything is going to affect any custodian supplied, especially the technologies coming on the line, then we need to expect coming up. So I'm not going to support the amendment because I feel I really support the leadership of the superintendent because he knows what he's doing. He has the big pictures, and then I really he has all my full trust. So I won't support the amendment as the way it is. Thank you.
Just want to remind everyone, we have an amendment on the floor, and we're taking questions on the amendment for the board to adopt the 80-50-20 payment schedule. So do we have any other questions on that amendment? I should say that it is challenging to ask questions about that specific amendment without touching on the other one. So I don't want to cut it too detailed, right, or be too specific about it. If we don't have any more questions on the amendment, we'll take public comment on the amendment. I'll remind the members of the public that are in the attendees. Sorry, my phone just dinged. That are on the attendees list to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. I'll call your name and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. We'll give just a few moments to see if anyone steps up. Okay, seeing none, we'll close that and we'll come back for further discussion from the board on the amendment. Anyone? I don't see any hands raised. Q. No one did it. That's usually when you guys all kind of raise your hands. I specifically to the amendment, and I'm going to backtrack on what I said a moment ago, where I'm going to speak about the whole presentation. I'm worried about changing the decision that the superintendent made for several reasons. That I'll, in a moment when we go back to the full motion, I'll explain in more detail. So for that, I won't be supporting this amendment, and later on expect to support what was already enacted by the superintendent. So having said that, why don't we vote on the amendment? Superintendent, do you have the roll call? So all those in favor of the amendment on the floor to adopt the 80-50-20 payment schedule for our spring coaches, please indicate when your name is called.
Mr. Atkinson?
No.
Mr. Balfons?
No.
Ms. Bondo,
No.
Mr. Burke,
No.
Ms. Figdor,
No.
Ms. Morioni,
No.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Mr. Barrow,
No.
and Chair Rodriguez.
No. And so the amendment fails with a 1-8 vote. We're back to the main motion. Are there any further questions? We're on questions on the main motion right now. Okay, if we don't have any, then we'll go to public comment on the main motion. So if anyone from the public wants to address the board, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Again, I'll give them just a few moments. Okay. Seeing none, we'll come back to the board for further discussion. Before we take a vote, anyone else has any other comments or anything else they want to share? Okay, seeing none. Like I started to say a moment ago, I'm gonna try to be short in this, but I am going to say a lot. I'm worried that over the last several weeks, this board, and I'm sure we've not done it purposely, or might not even been consciously doing this, but over the last several weeks, this board has moved in a direction that can be described as either attempting to micromanage some decisions of the superintendent, or perhaps it can be said not fully respecting the recommendations of the superintendent. And I know that's probably not the best word to use, because I don't think that any of us don't have respect for the work of the superintendent. But we are moving in a direction where I feel we're undermining some of the work and some of the recommendations that are coming to us from the superintendent, and I can't imagine that he feels good about it. I can't imagine that amongst everything else that he's dealing with, he's also having to deal with a board that perhaps is not aligned with the decisions that he's making. I say that fully acknowledging, or rather fully understanding, that it is our job to question the superintendent and to guide him and to give him guardrails to stay within, right? We give him that direction. But the level at which this type of change would move the board towards, in terms of the direction that we give the superintendent, in my opinion, just seems a little bit too close to details that, as the policy outlines, really falls under his direction or under his responsibility. And so for that reason, and to realign this board under the roles that we really should be serving for the superintendent as his bosses, for that reason, I will not be changing what the superintendent has already enacted, and I will be reaffirming the cuts that he's already proposed and explained on the spring stipends. So having said that, we'll put it to a vote. We'll do a roll call, and the superintendent will call our names.
Mr. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Balfons?
Yes.
Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Figdor?
Yes.
Ms. Morioni?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
And Chair Rodriguez?
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Yes, for me as well.
we forgot Anna.
Oh, sorry, Anna. I'm so sorry. Mr. Barrow, yes.
Yeah.
Good. So the motion, the motion passes unanimously. All right. Back to our agenda. We are at the public comment on any items not in this evening's agenda section. So if any member of the public that's in attendance wants to address the board on any item not on tonight's agenda, again, you can use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. I'd ask, well, wait, okay. I'll ask that you please start by giving us your name and your address. At the end of 3 minutes, if you need additional time, the board can grant you an additional 3 minutes, and at the end of those 3 minutes, your microphone will be shut off. So let's see, we'll start here. We'll go to Victoria Parker, and give me just a second. Victoria, can you?
Hi, Roberto.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, board. My name is Victoria Parker. I live at 169 Longfellow Street. I have not spoken or attended your meetings in a few years, but I'm happy to be here tonight. So I'm going to get reading. I have a letter that has been circulating. Many of you have probably heard about it over the past few days that we wrote about reclaiming school safety and an equity promise to our students. So here we go. Dear school board, this is not a time to show our children that we fear them or their peers by continuing to have their halls walked and enforced by an SRO. Now is the time to show them we see the trauma they are faced with outside of school walls, and we will work harder inside our schools to keep trauma out and invest in them, with them, for them, and their future. In response to yet another murder of a Black person by police, and in solidarity with the Minneapolis School District, we demand an end to our agreement with the Portland Police Department and to invest in 2 social workers who are specifically skilled and qualified to work with our BIPOC students, particularly Black students and students of new immigrant families for whom English is not their first language. The Portland Public School has an obligation and a promise to meet the educational needs of our children. The Portland Police Department has an obligation to meet the public safety needs of our community. This mandate includes our public schools. All decisions should support strategies that close equity gaps, not widen them. We have lived without SROs in our schools in the past. We live without them in the majority of Portland schools each day. A strong and vital partnership between Portland Public Schools and Portland Police Department is a key part of delivering upon Portland's promise. We do not need them within the schools to feel safe when the department is so close and responsive to our district as a whole. Please note this is a budget neutral plea with the potential for cost savings, a call for action, change, and a future investment in changing the way we treat, see, and empower our students within their school walls, collectively, parents and students of Portland Public Schools. I'm going to read you some voices and resources. But before I do, I want you to know currently we have 373 names attached to this letter, and it is climbing. It is diverse. It is students, alums, staff, parents, and residents of Portland. The voice of Portland High School alum.
Victoria, you have about 10 seconds left. Are you going to need the 3 more minutes?
Yes, please.
All right. Remember that at the end of 3 minutes, we're going to mute your mic.
Okay. This is from Abdi Ali, Portland High School alum. We all know this isn't the first killing of a Black man by a police officer. We've all seen the murder videos and protests just to see the officers get charges dropped, and walk away. Black and brown people have trauma they live in because of the daily terror they're in. It's not anger you see, it's fear. We need to shift our trauma. We need to shift our views and perspectives and look at it from a young Black student's view and perspective. Being taught slavery, Jim Crow, redlining into public housing, and now watching as mass incarceration and police killings are used to justify that we're still the problems here. As teachers, I am asking you to look back at our history and see why this is happening, why the system is terrorizing Black and brown people from the areas they live. to the jobs they have, to the generational trauma caused by our racial caste system. This isn't by accident, and we know you weren't the ones that created it, but we are responsible for fixing it. We live in two different worlds, the tale of the two cities. Black people have to try 10 times as hard to get anywhere in life, and while doing that, live with the fear of being killed. When will we take action? For all the white teachers, what if your child had the same terror and fear as that Black child? Wouldn't you want to keep their mental health sane? Has anyone asked us about our mental health at all? We're tired of saying it and explaining it. We can all see it in front of us. There's nothing left to be said. Let's set an example to the rest of the country and show how we can lead by putting our most vulnerable children first. Let's invest in social workers and change the militarization of our schools. Let's keep our communities safe. There are some other quotes and studies, and anyone is happy to look and share this document. I just want to let you know this is a collective letter. I did not write this by myself. I am just being the voice right now to pass it on to you. And we thank you for your appreciation. We've had 2 more people sign their names to the letter while I was reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, is there anyone else in attendance that wants to address the board? All right. We'll go to Margarita.
Hi, my name is Margarita Celestino, and I'm a student at Cascabel High School. And I have a little brother who's actually deaf, and I was wondering, like, what are the plans that the district has to support families with students with special needs if we continue to have remote learning?
Margarita, I just want to be real clear that during the public comment section or rather portion of our meeting is not necessarily a back and forward, so it'll be difficult to answer questions, but we're happy to communicate with you via email. And we did go over some of our continuity of education programming today, but we can certainly get someone to share information with you about our special needs students in our programming. But again, the public, maybe Ms. Nally, Assistant Superintendent Nally now raised her hand. She wants to offer her email and communication.
I just wanted to let you know that I put my email in the chat box, and you can feel free to email me directly.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Absolutely. And same thing with the board members. Feel free to email any of us, and we'll try to get you connected with the people that can get you answers, Margarita.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we're going to Nicole Myers. Nicole?
Yes, hi. Good evening. My name is Nicole Myers. I work for King Middle School as an ELL teacher. Just a couple of comments tonight for the superintendent and the board. Last night I noticed that there were quite a few students from Portland Public Schools at the protest, and I'm just wondering what the consideration is to support these students as we go into summer and sort of leave off, or leave them off, what sort of safety precautions, and also on the other end, counseling or even bail money or things like that if students find themselves in need of those resources are maybe being considered by the board or the superintendent. My second comment tonight is that I think that it is time to even go above and beyond social emotional learning and really incorporate and institutionalize anti-racist and anti-racism education in our school systems. I work for an expeditionary learning school, and one thing that has come up is learning alongside students. So actually having expeditions that not only incorporate, but are focused on anti-racist movements and history and policy making and
system change, systematic change. And then finally, my comment is on top of the diverse population that we have, I'm sorry if I'm running out of time, but on top of the diverse population that we do have at Portland Public Schools, we also have an additional layer of immigrants. And those unique challenges for our students and families require really expert knowledge of how to speak and talk and maneuver their specific challenges. I believe that our parent community specialists need some special attention right now, and I think they need special attention moving forward. I move that we start to look at their contracts as viable, salary-based, with professional medical benefits, things like that. I think we really need to uplift these professionals because we're going to find that they are going to be the backbone of what we need in our schools. And then finally, I think that we really need, Portland needs to start doing national and maybe even international searches for our staff, because we need to look and feel and be able to mentor the students that we represent. And that right now is not the case. So I thank you for allowing me to give some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Right. I see Margarita has her hand raised again. Let me see what.
Hi again. I wrote a letter to the school board and like.
Oh, Margarita.
Yes.
You're still here with us with the school board.
Sorry.
Are you talking to the school board right now? I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you. I couldn't tell if you were speaking to us or not. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, yeah, it's me, Margarita, again, a student from Cascaway High School. And I would like to know if, like, I could read a letter that I wrote today. And I already sent it out, but I would just like to read it.
Of course.
So, yeah. And I would like 3 minutes, 3 additional minutes. My name is Margarita Celestino, and I'm currently a junior at Cascaway High School. It's with great concern that I write up this letter of supplication. It has been brought to my attention that there will be a shift of federally funded support in order to fit the budget that the school board has set for our district. I'm aware that a lot of funds were spent in order to provide many students with hotspots and materials needed to accommodate students while learning remotely, and for provision of food for students who are considered to be food insecure and so forth. While it's important to address all of this and take it into consideration, it's essential to recognize that all this were the negative impacts of COVID-19. This pandemic has not only begun to be a stressor to students and teachers, but it's also been a great pain to families in general. Parents became teachers overnight, and students were forced to transition to a new style of learning that required a lot of adaptation. And I'm addressing reductions of athletics to co-curricular programs and the discontinuation of elementary school Spanish language classes. And I said, fortunately, I'm part of the Youth Engagement Program Partners, also known as YAPS, and I attended a meeting with the superintendent, Mr. Botana, and he stated that the reductions to athletics and co-curricular programs will not impact students that much. And he explained that they simply took away the funds that were mostly seen as unnecessary. But I would like to remind you all that there's power to that. And if we keep reducing the funds going into these programs, our district will not only stop helping our students, but it will limit them, because a student should be well-rounded. And creating a well-rounded student goes beyond just preparing them academically. And that is the main purpose of school. Many times students learn about themselves while doing extracurricular activities. And the slogan of Portland Public Schools is to be prepared and empowered. If students are only being limited to focusing on grades because of the lack of well-funded extracurriculars, then how are they going to be prepared and empowered? The mission of Portland Public Schools, or PPS, is to be responsible for ensuring a relevant and joyful education that empowers every learner to make a difference in the world. Academically speaking, students can be educated on various topics, but it's through extracurriculars that they can deepen their knowledge and build connections that will indeed make a difference in the world. As written in the PPS website, the goal of sports and extracurricular activities is for life enrichment of each participant through the development of good sportsmanship, citizenship, skills, health, strength, self-reliance, emotional maturity, and social growth. Accordingly, if sports are not being funded enough, where are the students going to get the skills from? And secondly, I would like to address the proposal of ending elementary Spanish classes. Having a discontinuation of elementary 4th to 5th grade Spanish classes will not be beneficial to creating students who are willing to go outside of their comfort zone. Only about 20% of the US population can speak another language besides English. The American education system itself already has a foreign language education deficit. So why end the little foreign language that PPS students have access to? If our district is not raising a bilingual group of students, how are we going to have language teachers in the future? This proposal is prioritizing foreign languages. America is known to be the melting pot, but how is our district going to contribute to this if students are not learning a second language at an early age? I also said that we could change the focus of other funds, for example, the funding of SROs. Our district has been paying to keep 2 SROs, one at PHS and the other at DHS. Instead of funding for SROs, PPS should be funding more social workers, psychologists, and guidance counselors. I know that one of the reasons why the schools are deciding to keep SROs is because most students, maybe teachers, feel safer with their presence. But who are most of those students? Are the voices of minority really being heard? Are students or employees expressing a concern that some students are afraid to have a presence of a police officer in school? People are speaking in favor of SROs, but are minorities being given the platform they need to fully express themselves? The school board has a lack of minority representation, leading to a very narrow point of view. Although these conversations occur in Black student unions, the district does not seem to be aware of how exactly students of colors feel about the topic. There is a disproportionate ratio between the numbers of white students and students of color. So no matter what, students of colors will always be outnumbered. And that is when equity should be coming in. Should we really be spending that much money on 2 SROs? There's no clear evidence that SROs really create the safest environment for students. After all, they're sworn police officers. They're not simply security guards, making it easier to funnel students into a criminal justice system. SROs do not work for the school. So why is the district paying for people who they do not have control over? With that said, approving reductions to athletics, co-curricular activities, and the discontinuation of elementary 4th to 5th grade Spanish classes while keeping 2 SROs makes me question where the priority of our district lies. As there's 4 main goals of Portland Public Schools, which is achievement of all PPS students so that they can be prepared for college, career, and empowerment. Goal 2, a whole student. All PPS students will develop the skills, habits, and mindsets they need to engage in and contribute to our diverse city and ever-changing world. 3, PPS is vigilant in supporting each and every student's particular path to achieving high standards, rooting out systematic on ongoing inequalities. And the 4th, PPS attracts, supports, and retains talented and diverse people who use their strengths to achieve our shared goals. Using the words all and every makes it seem like PPS has...
Margarita, are you almost done? You're done. You're up to your 6 minutes. Are you almost done?
I am almost done, yes.
Okay, we need to cut it off just for the length of it.
Yes. Using the words all and every makes it seem like PPS has the students' best interests at heart, and I believe that. But we have to really think about all the actions that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. Next, we'll go to Anita St. Ange. Anita?
Yes, hi. My name is Anita St. Ange. I'm the Director of Portland Adult Education. And I just wanted to address the issue of diversifying the Portland Public Schools workforce. I know that the school board is well aware of this, but I think in light of some of the things that we've talked about, it's important to talk to the public about the particular efforts that the Human Resources Department of Portland Public Schools in conjunction with Portland Adult Ed have undertaken in the last couple of years to really encourage and provide education and opportunities for foreign trained professionals, people who were teachers in their home countries, to come to Portland Public Schools, to become ed techs, to become teachers. It has been incredibly successful, and I think that it's very important at this particular time to acknowledge that work. I think it's really important, and I just wanted to put a word in for that. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Anita. Okay, if we don't have any other hands raised, we'll close the public comment portion of our meeting. Before we adjourn, I was planning on saying this, and Nicole, when she spoke, she kind of cued me in on it. She mentioned the amount of Portland students that we've heard have been involved in some of the demonstrations. So I just wanted to let the board members know, and members of the public. Earlier today, I participated in a couple of phone calls precisely to try to discuss those concerns. So early in the morning, I spoke with, there was a group of us, including a couple of city councilors, some state reps, school staff, just to initiate that conversation. And then later in the afternoon, there was a Zoom call with city leadership, with the manager, the mayor. I believe there were a couple of counselors, there were school staff, superintendent was there, and a couple of young people that have been leading some of the presentations in the city. So we are definitely aware of our students being involved in these demonstrations. We are obviously concerned for the level of risk that some of these activities have taken, especially late at night. And so we want to make sure that we not only support our students in what they're trying to attempt to speak about, right? But also that we work with the city to make sure that they are safe and that they're able to safely demonstrate and be heard, because the message that they're trying to portray is certainly an important one. And us as stewards of their city, I think that we need to do everything we can to not only encourage them to do that, but to provide that safe environment. And so I did appreciate the time that the city manager and staff took earlier today to have those conversations. And I'm sure they will continue. Superintendent is definitely motivated to make sure that he does his part. So unless he has anything else to add on that, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Bondo. All those in favor, please indicate, and we can just show our hands. Bam, high five, people. All right, we've adjourned at 9:34 p.m. Thank you all very much, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night.